Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Unknown Draft League podcast, brought to you by Smeargle and Limevolt. I'm Smeargle, and I'm joined by Limevolt. How are you?
Hey everyone, I'm doing all right. I'm Limepold, coach of the Santa Maria Samurats, as well as league staff for the Unown Draft League. And it's nice to be here. Smeargle, how are you doing?
I am doing pretty well. In today's episode, we will be laying out some of the base rules for the season and explaining the draft as the process we are going through it and the pools. Just for a little recap for those just listening in, new to the server, or returning and not playing, we will be going over the tiers, just a quick glance, mentioning some of the key players, and going over their drafts as they stand now.
Of course, for anyone who may join us in the future or just wish to look back upon this time as a refresher, we will also give a brief overview of how the draft functions, but the majority of time here will be spent on the players' drafts themselves, their current rosters. It may not be completely done at the moment. Several people have yet to finalize their entire drafts. However, they are very much so starting to feel complete, and so we wish to do a bit of analysis over who we felt might have stuck out a little bit, and just some interesting things we've seen people draft, because there's definitely some unique stuff this season that you don't usually get to see.
Yep, absolutely. And a little fun tidbit. I have been spoiled, of course, but this is my first look at the rosters and the drafting board. So that should be a little bit of fun.
Mm-hmm. Me, of course, being a league staff, one of the people who has kept the document up to date, as well as making sure everyone's rosters are correct, am fairly well acquainted with most of what there is. I also have a decent amount of notes to my side just so that I'm able to refresh myself on some ideas. But yes, as Smeargle said, this is his first time getting really like a deep dive into what has and hasn't been taken, what tiers Pokemon are in, and whatnot. So there very well may be some surprises on that end.
Absolutely. And a well-known fact, this draft league takes place in the Discord server. So little notes such as done draft picks are being reporting and drafting, or where we do all of our drafting in the first place, it will be in reference to that.
Yep, that is completely correct. If anyone ends up stumbling upon these podcasts who may not already be a part of UDL, please feel free to join the server. We're always down to have more people to spectate and just hang out in the chats. And of course, it's very well possible that you may end up sticking around and joining in future seasons.
It's absolutely free and absolutely chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
And why don't we jump in a little bit?
That sounds fine to me.
The Unknown Draft League server has just a couple rules. The general weekly matches that must be concluded. We play on Showdown as opposed to the cartridge, and the timer must be on, and replays of the games must be submitted in the proper channel. If you and your opponent so wish, you may play on carts. But a paste of your team must be submitted to a league staff member before your match.
All very true. If I may, to go ahead and take over a moment to explain the rest of the rules. As was mentioned, yes, Pokemon Showdown is the primary method for which games get played. Of course, you are allowed to play on cart, but given the nature of the draft and how it is formatted, you only have a single week to find a time to schedule and, of course, play with your opponent. So expecting all matches to be done on cart would be a bit unfeasible unless, everyone were to, use the G word. We're not going to repeat here.
Forbidden word.
Yes. Of course, Showdown allowing you to fine-tune your teams. You don't need me to explain what it is, most likely. You've all heard of it. The rules For the draft league itself, some of the basics Smeargle already mentioned. Timer must be on. You must submit a paste of your team to a league staff member for the sake of verification, just to make certain that you don't end up swapping your team in any of the games, because yes, games are best of 3. You must beat your opponent in a best of 3 set in order to actually win. Of course, there are more staff members than just me, so if you happen to be playing against a staff member a certain week, you can submit to someone else. They aren't necessarily going to have your paste. No need to worry about that. Other than that, it's standard VGC rules. This season, we are going with the rule set of Regulation D, which, amongst the more regular rules that we've come to expect, allows some very interesting Pokemon to be legal this season. Notably including the Genies, the Ruins, and both Urshifus.
That sounds very exciting, especially considering we have 2 pods this season, meaning there can be 4 Urshifus running around.
Mm-hmm. And more than just the fact that there are. As Smeargle mentioned, due to the player size this season, the players were split into 2 different pools for the sake of drafting, where Pool A and Pool B don't directly influence each other, and Pokemon can be taken independently. If a person in Pool A picked, for example, Urshifu Rapid Strike, then a person in Pool B is also allowed to take that same Urshifu Rapid Strike. This leads to duplicates of certain Pokemon, and as we will get into, yes, of course, all 4 Urshifus were already drafted by someone. Both Urshifu Single Strike and Urshifu Rapid Strike, once each in both pools.
And this draft has been a snake draft. That means everyone has been randomly put into a generator and popped back out in a random order. In said order, you will go down the line and then back up the line. Each team is required to draft either 1 S tier and 1 B tier, or 1 S tier and 1 A tier among the others, meaning you
I must
can
pop in
get...
for a moment.
I apologize.
I must pop in for a moment to correct Smeargle. What he meant to say is that each roster is only allowed to have 1 Pokemon of either the S tier or the S plus tier. You cannot have 1 of each. If you were to take an S tier, then you're also allowed to have your main roster have a Pokemon residing in the A tier. However, if you were to take a Pokemon from the S plus tier, then that A tier on your core roster is instead swapped out for an additional B tier. So you get 1 really strong Mon on your roster, but the overall power of the rest sort of diminishes a little. Bit of trade-off there.
And immediately we can tell who is playing this season and who is not.
That is very true. As I mentioned, I am the coach of the team which goes by the name of the Santa Maria Samurats. Smeargle is a spectator. He has played in past seasons and, of course, is experienced with the draft itself. Just decided to sit it out this time.
Yep, taking a back seat, giving everyone a break from insanity.
And insanity certainly provided. This is the dude who once first picked Chansey.
And Shuckle.
And Shuckle, unfortunately. No need to remind me, and no need to unveil the horrors to anyone who may not already be familiar.
To those who are not familiar, you should remain lucky.
To those who are not familiar, this man who is in the voice call with me is insane. Regardless, going back to the core rosters, as was already mentioned, you're allowed to take either an S tier or an S plus tier, with an additional slot in your roster being influenced by that, either an A tier or a B tier, depending on whether you picked S or S plus. Then, regardless of those 2, every roster will also have 2 B tiers, 2 C tiers, a D tier, and 4 slots for what are referred to as free agents. Free agents function a little bit differently, in that rather than abiding by the core slots on your team, you are given a set amount of points, of which you are able to buy your free agents. For these, S plus and S Pokemon are not allowed to be taken as free agents. However, A tiers can be bought for 100 points, B tiers for 75 points, C tiers for 50 points, D tiers for 25, and E tiers, the bottom of the barrel, are completely free. Of the 4 slots you have for your free agents, you are allotted 250 points. So this can allow for combinations such as simply an A tier, B tier, C tier, and D tier. You could go an A tier, two B tiers, and an E tier. You could even go two A tiers, a C tier, and an E tier. So there's a lot of customizability and a lot of flexibility for what you can do with your free agent slots.
And while we have two pods, once the drafting is over, both drafting boards will be opened up. So if you get sniped, you may pick something from the now open roster.
That is very true. The separated pools are not separated leagues, so to speak. They will be merged once drafting is done, and they will be able to play against each other. So, going back to the Urshifu example, it's very possible, though very unlikely, that someone were to fight four Urshifu players in a row each week. Um, Regardless of that, though, yes, any Pokemon who is not taken in any pool is able to be traded as an FA during the main season. So let's say, for example, you were in Pool A and you really wanted Dondozo, but it got drafted in Pool A. Well, once drafting is finished, you can swap out a free agent of yours who is in the same tier as Dondozo, this of course being the A tier, for the Dondozo who was not taken, the one from B. Not the B tier, but Pool.
I must note that Lime, you are in the league staff. You can make it
Mhm.
possible for someone to face all four Yorshifus in a row.
Not quite, actually. The league staff is primarily just to make sure people don't go too insane. When it comes to who you are actually fighting, previously we had done round robin formats. However, with the growing size of the league, that's no longer feasible. There's 26 players this season, and I doubt anyone would want 25 weeks of a main league. Which is why, this season, we're trying something a little bit different and are instead going for a Swiss format. A Swiss format, for those unaware, essentially means that you're going to be paired against people with the same record as you. So if you have one win and zero losses, then the next week you will also be attempted to be paired with somebody with one win and zero losses. So on and so forth as the weeks go on. Your 4 wins and 2 losses will try and pair you with someone who's also 4 wins and 2 losses. This is to help make sure that everyone is able to face people of their rough skills and their rough quality of their rosters, while also making it so that the league doesn't drag on forever. As of these Swiss rounds, only 8 weeks of Swiss will be happening, this being one match per week, before we will then go into the playoffs, where the top X amount of players will then compete in a bracket for the season champion.
And it is the coach's responsibility to communicate with each other to plan your weekly matches. Executive
Mhm.
action may be taken. However, we're pretty good about that. In there have not been many no-show games, I believe.
That is true. Generally speaking, people are very punctual and people are able to get their games on time. Of course, if there is an instance where you need a time extension for whatever reason, it's a bit trickier this season due to Swiss requiring us to know your records. So if you're able to get it like at the last minute. So for reference, we would want matches to be played between Tuesday and Saturday of each week. However, if you need it pushed to Sunday for whatever reason, it can definitely be accommodated. It just has to be done before the start of the next. If by that point the match is unable to be played, then unfortunately losses and game losses and disqualifications will have to be given out. Missing a week doesn't mean that you're out of the league. It just means that you don't get any points for that. We're not going to punish you that harshly.
And after all of this, Lime alluded to the top eight. The
The top
top
X is
eight,
what I had said, but yes, top 8 is currently what is being proposed.
my fault.
You're fine, you're
In
fine.
in this postseason, the top X teams from the regular season will be seeded into a playoffs bracket, and they will battle it out for the Unknown Draft League championship title.
Correct,
Basic
yes.
The basic rule, outside of everything previously mentioned, is that no transactions of any kind are permitted. So your team is yours.
Yep, that's very correct. A big thing about the league is the social aspect of it. Obviously, we're all in the Discord together. You can hang out, have fun, make jokes. But more than just simply playing against your opponents, you are also able to trade with people. Of course, these trades have to be between Pokemon of the same tier. And for example, if one Pokemon is a free agent, then the one you're trading for must also be a free agent, and vice versa. But you are able to communicate people and adjust your roster as you go, sort of feel things out and make up for any weaknesses you may have missed with your initial draft. But, as was mentioned, once the final week of Swiss has concluded and playoffs start, rosters are locked in and you are no longer able to trade them out. So you better hope that your team is able to function well. If you're qualifying for playoffs, chances are that's the case, but still, having any lingering holes or any issues in the team can definitely spell downfall.
Speaking of transactions and drafting, why don't we take a look at the drafting board?
Fair enough. So, as has been mentioned, there are 7 tiers, these being S plus, S, A, B, C, D, and E. Of course, the Pokemon in these tiers vary in power, going from S plus being the strongest and E being the weakest, with your roster comprised of Pokemon from theoretically every tier. You could skip out on S plus or E, that we're not going to judge you for it. But overall, Pokemon assigned to these tiers are roughly assumed to be of the same strength. As was mentioned, a Pokemon in A tier and a Pokemon in C tier, generally the A tier is going to be stronger. And that's okay, because you're not going to have infinite A tiers. One of the most fun and interesting parts about the Draft League is the amount of niche and otherwise unseen Pokemon that you get to really have make a difference. Like, the lower power level makes it so that a lot of things can function where they otherwise wouldn't. For example, in a previous season, Shroomish had great results. We have seen Pokemon such as Haunter put in work. We've seen Pokemon such as Houndoom pick up tons of KOs. And just because a Pokemon is in a lower tier doesn't necessarily mean that it's useless. It can do a lot.
I am now looking at the drafting board, and it is quite sad to see that Hoopa has been banned.
As was mentioned, this is playing with the Regulation D rule set, so obviously Pokemon such as Groudon, Hoopa, Zamazenta, Calyrex, Shadow, those are all banned, but that doesn't mean that there aren't some ridiculous new additions. Some of the new additions to this season, including, like I had said, the Ruins, Chenpao, Chiyu, Tinglu, and Rochien. We have Pokemon such as all 8 of the genies, as weird as that feels to say after all these years of there only being 6.
It really does feel so weird.
Regieleki is back. Rillaboom has returned. We now have Ursaluna. There are so many, in fact, that compared to the previous season, there are more new Pokemon placed in the S plus tiering than there were S plus Pokemon in the last season. That's how much new power was added to this format. And that's just S plus alone. Believe me when I say there are plenty of other very strong Pokemon in the lower tiers as well. Be it Moltres Galar, be it Basculegion. Even things like Thwacky in the context of a draft can be really solid.
I still love how you cooked a Greninja out of B tier.
Yes, cooked just being a sort of slang term we enjoy to use just for, so to speak, cooking up a very strange or interesting strategy. Greninja, for example, during the initial tiering process for this season, as it was a new addition, was initially proposed to be put in B tier. Then I brought up the idea of Loaded Dice Water Shuriken, and people pretty much swarmed to put it in A. And even within the A tier, it was still taken in both pools, so clearly that was a good choice.
It was, and I do believe it was Hazel managed to draft both Greninja and Chi-Yu.
Yes, Greninja Chiyu, very terrifying combo, but that's one that we can get into a little bit later when we're going over the rosters.
Yep.
As for the drafting board itself, Smeargle, are there any Pokemon that catch your eye before I go through my list of ones that I think are just really great value for where they landed?
I've noticed it's not necessarily its tiering, but Bruxish has been taken by someone.
Yes, Bruxish, notorious for it not being the most visually attractive Pokemon. I personally love it for that reason. It's a common joke that I make that it's actually optimal. It's so ugly that it'll distract your opponent and force them to misplay.
Interestingly, I just noticed of the 4 ruins, out
Mm-hmm.
of 8 possible times they could have been picked, Chi-Yu and Chien-Pao have only been picked once. Ting-Lu and Wo-Chien have not been picked at all.
Yes, that was one part that I was pretty surprised about. Wo-Chien is notorious for being not as strong as the others. However, compared to the other 3 ruins, it's a tier lower, only being S tier. So I figured the value there may have enticed some people, but evidently not. Ting-Lu, I guess people just thought he was too passive. Maybe they weren't the biggest fan of press and fissure in a competitive league. But yeah, Chen Pao and Chi Yu both only getting taken once was definitely a big surprise to me. I was heavily expecting them to get taken twice. And speaking of Pokemon expected to get taken twice, the Genies. I mean, Tornadus Incarnate, of course, got taken twice. That's not
Of course,
surprising at all. But Landorus Incarnate didn't get taken at all. Thunderous
Landers
Therian didn't taken at all.
Landers
Either
Therian only got picked once.
yeah, Landorus Therian only got picked once, and Enamorus, neither form was picked at all. It was just left in the dust.
That is very interesting.
So, surprising lack of genies and lack of ruins for what we expected would be something that would otherwise completely dominate the metagame. However, one thing that we had already alluded to, everyone's favorite Pokemon to click Protect in front of, Urshifu, was taken 4 times. So, throughout the league, again, though unlikely, it is possible that you were to fight 4 Urshifu during your main league of the 8 weeks. And who knows, in some miracle 1 in a trillion universe, you could fight even more, as you could fight Urshifus back to back to back in the playoffs. You could potentially fight, 7 Urshifus over the course of your 11 weeks? It is insane just how prevalent this mon is going to be, and it's very, very scary.
And it looks like more people went with the S plus and B tier on their main roster than S and A, which I think is
Yes.
interesting.
In previous seasons, S tiers were often preferred over S pluses just because they were more reliable and the overall strengthening of your roster was something very notable. But this season, the S plus tiers in question are just so universally strong that it's hard to argue against it. Because, yeah, you could go into the S tier and you could draft like Iron Moth or Grimmsnarl, or you could just walk over to S plus and grab a Fluttermane or an Iron Hands or an Urshifu.
As everyone seemingly has.
Pretty much. But yes, to step away from the S plus and S tiers for just a moment, some other Pokemon I want to mention. Baxcalibur, previously in S tier, this season fell to A tier. Whether or not that ends up being a mistake, we're gonna find out because to give a little bit of foreshadowing to the rosters, Baxcalibur was actually first picked. That's right, first picked in a format that has Fluttermane available, it has Tornadus, it has everything with a funny name that I keep repeating over and over. Baxcalibur got picked first because it was an A tier as opposed to an S tier. So evidently that's really good value.
I think in the other league it was still a first pick on the way down.
I believe so. If not first pick, it went very early. It wasn't the first Pokemon to go in both leagues. I believe that honor actually does, in fact, go to Fluttermane, but it went very early on both sides. Another A tier, rather not an A tier, but a duo of A tiers. This season, both Dondozo and Tatsugiri are in A tier, so you can draft both of them while still maintaining an S tier, or even an S plus, because as has been mentioned, you can use your free agents to take 2 A tiers. So you could take an S plus and then also have Dozogiri in your pocket, and those are 2 massive threats that an opponent has to account for.
Typhlosion Hisui has been taken twice. That is interesting.
Yes, that is a Pokemon that's an A tier. I mean, I think that I can kind of get why. Another rule that we had neglected to go over, my apologies there, is the fact that this is done with closed team sheets. Of course, you are allowed to see your opponent's roster. There's no real way we'd ever be able to prevent that since the nature of us, posting the replays for everyone to watch and also allowing trades. But closed team sheets definitely does impact things, and though some may not be the biggest fan of it, I personally love its ability in Frisk. Just getting that early information is so good, and on top of that, Fire Ghost Stab really reliable, and it's got pretty decent speed, pretty good special attack. Fire Stab, give it a Charcoal, give it a Specs, make it click Eruption. What more do you need in life?
And I see Tatsugiri has been taken. Someone has drafted the Dondozo Tatsugiri combo.
Yep, as I had mentioned, and not only drafted the combo, but drafted them as free agents. The Hardened Metapods has that honor of piloting Dozogiri this season. Previous seasons, it didn't work out as well, partially because of how easy it is to, build around, because you can see it coming. You can just slap haze on one of your Pokemon, and that certainly helps. But when you have to deal with Dondozo Tatsugiri, as well as another super strong threat, then that becomes a lot more questionable as to how easy it is to deal with.
It was actually something I was going to mention with Wo Chien. You can see, of course, what's coming, but
Mm-hmm.
you still only have your 11 Pokemon to figure out an answer to them.
It's very
Tatsugiri,
true.
Tatsugiri and Dondozo, if you don't have something that can click haze, or you only bring one or two answers and they go fast, you're pretty much out of luck.
I mean, hey, speaking of Pokemon that do go fast, during the tiering process, this was one that I personally wished would go in S tier. I voted for this to go in S tier, but as voted by the community in the Discord, Sneasler fell into A tier. Somehow sneaked its way into A tier, and that
And
thing
got
is
selected
terrifying.
twice.
Yes, of course it got selected twice. I don't think it should have even been in this tier. It's super fast, it's super strong, it has Unburden, and reminder, Rillaboom is also available. So you can just slap on a Grassy Seed, click Unburden Acrobatics, you're cooking. A player drafted that. I believe the Bodacious Bulbasaurs picked Rillaboom and Sneasler, and that's just horrifying to me. I don't know if that's just me, but I don't think that was okay.
It also gets poison touch, even pressure in a league like this.
Yeah, it has some amount of relevance. And again, just Sneasler, it's such a volatile Pokemon. Of course, it has that super high damage, but then it has the. I'm not going to say the stupidest move. There are dumber moves, but Dire Claw is just so silly. Like, I don't think this was a move that should have ever left Legends Arceus. Like, Hisuian Gudra had Shelter, which boosted its defense and evasion in Legends Arceus. I think Dire Claw should have gotten a similar treatment, where it having a 50% chance to sleep, poison, or paralyze, while also being an 80 base power stab move for Sneasler, I don't think that's okay.
Aiming to land a critical hit. Does that mean it has a upped crit chance as well?
In this game, at least, it doesn't, but I would have preferred if Dire Claw was just a high crit move as opposed to the nonsense we currently have.
That is very interesting.
Yes. Going down another rung, Tinkaton, a Pokemon that didn't end up seeing too much success the previous season. However, I think this was partially in part of its tiering. It was previously an A tier. Currently, it's just B, and that's a lot more solid. It's a
And it
really
got picked
reliable.
twice.
Yeah, it did. It's a reliable Pokemon with arguably, not even arguably, just straight up the best type in the game. Steel Fairy is broken. We've seen it plenty of times. We've seen Mega Mall. We've seen Zacian. We know what this typing does. And just, access to moves like Gigaton Hammer, access to moves like Fake Out,
Doesn't it
Thunder
get
Wave,
faint as
Helping
like
Hand.
its supporting
Uh,
set is great.
yeah, like Tinkaton can do some alright damage with Gigaton Hammer. It can threaten some stuff, but its supporting set, like you mentioned, is really solid. And yes, Feint is a move that it gets Feint, it gets Bulldoze, it goes Encore, Fake Out, Fake Tears, Fling.
A personal favorite, Baby Doll Eyes.
Yeah, Baby Doll Eyes even, you can do all sorts of things with this. And it's certainly, I think, a very high value pick.
Wait,
Um,
Ice Hammer
it's got a big hammer. That makes enough sense for it to know.
lowers user speed.
Have you never seen this move before?
I have not, actually.
Oh, that's silly.
Introduced in Gen 7.
Mm-hmm. Regardless, another
Sir, it's
Pokemon.
the only
Mhm.
person that learned it in Gen 7 was Crabominable.
Yes, that was its signature move. I'm pretty sure that was in the marketing for Gen 7.
And of course now Tinkaton gets it. So
um,
But that's just another move for it. That's
I mean,
100
it's
base
a
power.
100 base power ice move. It's not terrible. Lowering its speed definitely does hurt, though, and no one likes a 90 accuracy.
No, but if you do have a Trick Room option, Tinkaton's speed's not very good.
Um, this is where some people in the server may spout the phrase I mentioned, let him cook. What is he cooking? I would say this man just burnt down the entire kitchen. Let's not do that.
Yeah, I am known to do that.
Yes. Another great Pokemon in B tier, Corviknight. This was one
Oh,
that
that's
was
a
really up
B
in the
tier?
air. Yes, this was actually a very split vote. I believe at the end there was a vote between, 16 people, with it being like 7 votes for it in A tier and 9 votes for it in B tier. It was very split, but
That is
it did end up staying in
close.
B tier. Yes. And I think it's a really good pick at that point. It's a great defensive Pokemon. Steel Flying is an excellent type. Mirror Armor is decent. Pressure is good. It gets Body Press. It gets, tons of different defensive tools just to act as a backbone for a team. U-turn for pivoting, even. It's solid.
Looking down the B tier, the number of even A tier, the Pokemon that got selected twice over the Pokemon that haven't been selected at all is very interesting.
Yeah, there are some neat picks.
Like
To quickly dip into the C tier, Tauros. Not Tauros Paldea, but the Kanto version of Tauros got picked twice. However,
none
Tauros
of the
Tauros
Paldea.
Paldea Fire, and Tauros Paldea Water, none of them got picked at all. So of the 8 possible Tauros, we only got 2, and it was the normal type one. And I'm guilty of this. It's on my roster.
And I've noticed neither Zoroark has been picked.
Yes, neither Zoroark has been picked. However, Zorua Hisui was taken.
Ooh. What tier is that E tier?
That's a C tier. What do you mean E tier? Zorua Hisui, look at that thing's stats. Open it up on Showdown. This thing is crazy. You're
Pardon
going
me,
to
sir.
learn today if you think that thing belonged in E tier. 70 speed, 85 special attack with illusion, normal ghost stabs. It gets nasty plot. This thing's filthy. And this is the thing about the draft league, is that a Pokemon like Zorua Hisui, who would otherwise just, be in competitive limbo, it would never have a place.
Oh,
Here it does.
it learns Bitter Malice. I think that was.
Mm-hmm. I mean it when I say it. A previous season, a player by the name of Timid Tailwind, otherwise known as Hazel, she drafted Zorua, not Zorua Hisui, just Zorua, because Hisui wasn't allowed yet, and that thing wrecked house. There were several moments that I was reviewing matches, and I had to redo the stats because I got caught off guard by the Zorua. I was like, okay, that's not Zorua. There's no way it took that kill. It gets hit, reveals Zorua. I was like, wait, it actually did that much damage? This thing is crazy. It's a huge sleeper pick.
I'm glad to know. I'm glad to see. I just saw in C tier the Oricorios.
Yes, the Oricorios.
They
Some
finally got
pretty solid
split.
Pokemon overall. Yes, that was a problem with the previous season, but has since been fixed.
Yeah, I lost the game because I asked him which Zorua or which Oricorio he was using, and he told me I don't think it was the wrong one, but it was the one that influenced my prep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was an issue with the past season, has since been fixed. Generally speaking, if a Pokemon has multiple forms, such as a regional form or just a changed form, like the Oricorios, then it's going to be separated on the dock. So similar to the Tauros is how there's 8 of them total possible, or Oricorio there's also 8 of them total possible. However, similar to Tauros, only 2 of them actually got picked. One of Bile and the one of Pom Pom. Those being the fire and electric type variants specifically. Regardless, there are a couple other Pokemon that I'd like to go ahead and speed run through, but really, I want to get
got
to
selected twice.
Quillfish is a good Pokemon. You have to remember, Overquill now exists, so it is allowed to hold Eviolite.
Ooh, true.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, Quillfish Hisui is a good pick. But yeah, there are a couple other Pokemon I briefly want to speed through, but I want to get to the drafts themselves. I want to get to the rosters, because that's the real meat and potatoes of this, and we've spent enough time, just overviewing the doc. So
I think that's
some
true.
more Pokemon that I think are very solid that I think are some really good value picks. Iron Jugulus in B, Slitherwing in B, Rotom Heat in B. This was a great call by one of our players, actually. Venonat, not Venomoth, Venonat is in E tier, yet still sports things like Compound Ice, Sleep Powder, and Rage Powder. So definitely a very good usage of their E tier, because E tiers, they're the bottom of the barrel, right? They're normally meant to be like, basically, you put this on your team for fluff because you wanted, more points for your other 3 slots in FAs, but he managed to get really good value out of his E tier. On the other end,
there's also a very niche thing you can do if your E tier learns something like a priority move. It is
yeah,
something
there are
that
some things. Yeah,
I've done. Weakness
mhm.
policy, like they are
yeah, like
obviously not going to do damage.
yeah, like a very weak like Sobble, for example, to trigger like an Ice Shard or an Aqua Jet weakness policy, things like that.
And with Terra, things can get pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm. But yes, now on the other end of things, I want to quickly go over some Pokemon that I think were pretty solid, but didn't get drafted at all. So these are not Pokemon that got drafted once. This is a Pokemon that got 0 picks, but I think were pretty solid. In the S tier, we have Iron Valiant, just great damage. We have Ursaluna, one of the best Trick Room mons you could ever ask for. And notably, we got Zapdos. This Pokemon just won Worlds, and no one picked it here. Down in the A tier, Glimmora. Not one you would initially think of, however, it saw a lot of success in previous seasons. Not just hazard stacking, but also just doing good, reliable damage. This thing is surprisingly strong.
It does have a great, actual meta presence.
Mm-hmm. Last season, Glimmora was something you actively had to account for, because just like a Glimmora Terra Fairy Dazzling Gleam, that messed up a lot of rosters. Because when you look at this thing, I mean, its special attack stat is 130, and its speed is 86. This is not something to sleep on. This is not just a defensive wall.
I know I drafted Glimmet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Glimmet, also not the worst thing ever.
Yeah, it
Another
105.
example of a low tier Pokemon that's able to get good value.
And of course, if you did hit into it, Toxic Debris.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to go ahead and speedrun these last few because, again, I want to get to the rosters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lilligant Hisui. Notably, base Lilligant got picked twice. Lilligant Hisui, not at all. Maybe people just preferred the special as opposed to the physical. Maybe people are worried about that 4 times flying weakness. Who knows? Sandy Shocks. Got a lot going for it. It's got good typing. There's access to gravity plus hypnosis if you want to go that route. It's just solidly strong overall. Skeledirge, a great Pokemon that can completely overrun a team if you let it set up for a little bit, has access to reliable recovery, and obviously, Torch Song with Throat Spray, very solid. Falling down to the B tier, Bronzong, one of the best support Pokemon seen in the league, period. This thing has been on the winning roster multiple seasons, didn't get picked at all. Cyclizar, despite having, Shed Tail and being able to do all that to potentially set up for, a big Urshifu player, just, to try and put one of your S pluses out there really aggressively. Didn't get picked at all. Thwackey, again, it's baby Rillaboom, but Rillaboom is S tier for a reason. This thing still gets all its tools. It still has Grassy Surge, still has Fake Out, still has Woodhammer, Knockoff, U-Turn, everything you can ask for. And while it's not doing as much damage, give it an Eviolite, it's got good survivability. And also, on the topic of Rillaboom, Drifblim. Give that thing Unburden, that thing knows Tailwind. That's the fastest thing you could ever ask for. If I'm not mistaken, an unburdened max speed Drifblim can set up a Tailwind faster than a Regieleki can move. I would have to fact check that, but I believe that to be true. So it's clear that there's a lot of stuff that's still in the air. People still are able to make their drafts. People have free agents that they can swap out. So it's not like these Pokemon aren't going to see anything, but they're just some things that I think I'm a little shocked that they didn't get any love whatsoever.
I did notice, however, Mousehold is an S tier.
Yes, that is true. Mousehold, one could argue it should be an A, but honestly, given its supporting capabilities, I think I'm perfectly comfortable with it being an S.
I would have thought it was an A tier because its only offense, really, it is absolutely a great supporting Pokemon, but its only offense is really Population Bomb.
I think the big thing about it is the fact that in this league, Annihilate is legal. And I don't think anyone wants to deal with Mousehold Annihilate in a draft league at all. I would know Annihilate being legal.
I was
I
gonna say
drafted it. If Annihilate Mousehold was a legal pairing that you were able to obtain, I would absolutely take that, and I would feel no remorse. That's not fair.
that is a
That pairing alone keeps it in S tier.
turn one lead every single game.
Yes, what are you going to do about it? I'm picking your apples.
I've noticed nobody, even without the second Pokemon, Torkoal didn't get picked at all. And
Yes, I guess people just weren't very favored for Trick Room this season. No Torkoal, no Ursaluna, no Cresselia, notably.
no Chris.
People weren't a fan of Trick Room. Granted, it's pretty easy to play around it in draft. You know, again, it's the thing where you always are going to see it coming, so you know to prep for it. But seeing no one attempt it at all is a bit surprising.
Yeah, if your S plus tier is Cresselia, you're almost always going to prep for Trick Room. But at the
Pretty
same
much.
time, even in VGC, you can make it like the unstoppable Trick Room setup with like Mental Herb, Cresselia, and all that. But
The biggest issue with Trick Room is just the fact that its biggest abusers are all locked behind the high tiers. Like, you want Cresselia, and you want Torkoal, and you want Ursaluna, and you want a bunch of other stuff. Those three alone are all higher than A, so you're only allowed one of them, period. And the other Pokemon that excel in Trick Room are just as high. Glastrier is in A tier, Hippowdon is in A tier, like, Screamtail is in A tier, Gothitelle is in A tier. Like,
can I take a guess who drafted Screamtail?
If you're going to say the Bodacious Bulbasaurs, actually no.
Interesting.
Notably, as of now, Screamtail only got drafted in Pool B, and Bodacious Bulbasaurs are in Pool A. For those unaware, the captain of the Bodacious Bulbasaurs, very, very much so a fan of Screamtail, one of their favorite Pokemon.
Very much a fan. But I was going to say there was no Torkoal and nothing from the Jump Bluff line. I know.
This is true, yeah.
Even
Torkoal is definitely a good Sun setter, but as we're going to see later, someone actually did draft a Sun team without Torkoal, and they had a very interesting idea for the way that they're going to set Sun that I can't wait to get into.
Ooh. And I do, we can move on to rosters, but I do want to call out one thing. Somebody drafted Chansey.
Unfortunately, this is true.
Chansey is one of my personal favorites.
And not for moral reasons.
Absolutely not.
This is the man who would show up to draft league matches with Serene Grace Blizzard Chansey. This is the man that showed up to draft matches with Defense Curl Rollout Chansey.
I don't even remember if it had rollout. I think it was just Defense Curl.
If I'm not mistaken, you also showed up one week with Growl.
I think, yeah. What else?
Anyways.
Yeah, I did a lot of things. I used the move Hail on Chansey.
Whoa. Hail? That's not real. That doesn't exist. It's called Snowskate. What are you talking about?
Oh, damn, you're right.
Hail? What's that? You take damage in that weather? That doesn't happen.
Yeah, I did a lot of things.
Yeah.
To move
Let's go ahead and move on.
Rosters.
Yes. So, as was mentioned, they are divided into two categories, these being Pool A and Pool B. We're going to go through all of the Pool A picks, and then we're going to go through all the Pool B. That sound good?
Works for me.
Alright, so, first up, funnily enough, just the way Random Chance works, we have a staff member by the name of Jay, the coach of the Saucy Spidops, very interesting team name, with a roster of King Gambit, Sylveon, Salazzle, Slowking, Fletchling, Tauros, this is the other regular normal type Tauros, Baxcalibur, as mentioned, this was the first pick, Meowscarada, and Impidimp. The D tier and E tier FA Pokemon have not been filled out. As has been mentioned, the rosters are not fully complete, but we figured they were complete enough that we'd be able to get our general thoughts across for most of them. Smeargle, what's your initial reaction here?
I see a very fast team. Very fast, very offensive. King Gambit.
That's an interesting take, because I was thinking the exact opposite, actually. Or rather, I think it's very fast in terms of tempo, but its speed overall is quite low.
But there's
It of
also
course does have
Fletchling
it does have Fletchling, but
and
it's not
Impidimp.
going to. Fletchling and Impidimp are decent, but it's not going to make up for speeds on Pokemon like King Gambit. I think playing to the strength of that is definitely going to be a great way to do it. Of course, they have great defensive core of Kingambit, Sylveon, Excalibur. That's a pretty decent Steel Fairy Dragon core. Um, they also have good Fire, Water, Grass and Salazzle, Slowking, Yaskarada. But I think a big thing to actually watch out for with this team is the fact that overall it's pretty slow. And Slowking is an obvious answer for running Trick Room. But I think one thing that is going to be seen a good amount is actually Meowscarada setting Trick Room. Since it, of course, has the ability to function outside of it, especially if you bring Fletchling. So it has the ability to sort of, like, feint Trick Room and either, play around it when the team needs it or just otherwise, bluff it. As well as, of course, sending it when it actually is beneficial. I think Meowscarada learning Trick Room really ties this team together and makes it a lot scarier than it otherwise would be.
The D and E tier picks are going to be interesting. I think I
Mhm.
only saw one of the Shroomish was picked.
It is possible that a Shroomish would get picked by someone else, not by them. Shroomish is in C tier.
Oh, it's in C?
Yes.
For good reason. Jeez.
Yes. Regardless, so what are your general thoughts on that roster before we move on to the second player?
I think you were right about the tempo. Like, it is
Mm-hmm.
very fast, and it
Yes.
lives just by natural bulk.
Mm-hmm. I agree. It's got good tempo, uh, sort of middling speed stats. It has the potential to go fast, but I think Trick Room is probably going to be the best mode for it, even if it doesn't have a lot of, the standard Trick Room Pokemon we had mentioned before.
Yep.
Player number 2 in Pool A, the Dancing Dragonites, coach of this being a player by the name of Tenacity. Roster is Fluttermane, Gastrodon, Iron Jugulus, Hariyama, Gothorita, Typhlosion, this is Johtoian Typhlosion, Glastrier, Serena, and Wordier. Here we see another Trick Room team, but one thing I personally don't actually like with this roster is the Fluttermane. Fluttermane is a fantastic Pokemon, don't get me wrong, and the option to threaten Perish Trap with Gothorita is pretty decent, but this team feels really heavily centered around Trick Room with Pokemon like Hariyama and Glastrier and Gastrodon.
Even
And the Fluttermane
Typhlosion.
just even Typhlosion, yeah, like the Fluttermane just feels a little bit out of place here, all things considered.
I honestly agree, unless it's a very, like, fast start with, like, Fluttermane, Scarf Typhlosion, Serena, maybe? I don't
Oh, of
know.
course, like you can
Into
run a
trigger?
fast mode. Yeah, things like, Tailwind Iron Jugulus, you have Hariyama for fake out support. Like, you can go fast, don't get me wrong, but this team, it feels like Fluttermane was tacked on rather than built around. Which, of
Maybe.
course, we know isn't entirely true since Fluttermane was their first pick. It'll be interesting to see how this team is piloted. It's entirely possible
Absolutely.
I'm incorrect here, but I think that this is going to be something that is going to take a lot of skill to pilot. Of course, as mentioned, the Perish Trap option is still really scary.
It is absolutely incredibly scary.
Mm-hmm.
You and I
Player
would
3.
know.
Yes. Player 3, Golden Goomies. This is a super unique roster that I personally
Oh, wow.
love. For reference, I'm a bit biased in that I'm a generally very defensive player. I enjoy making games slow down a lot in pace and sort of forcing the opponent to play my game. So the Golden Goomies roster really resonates with me. It has Amoonguss, Arcanine, Tinkaton, Chestnut, Electros, Bombardier, Gyarados, Articuno, Galar, and Slitherwing.
The
So
first three picks alone.
first 3 picks alone, but I think even more than the first 3 picks. Amoonguss, Arcanine, Gyarados is such an incredible Fire, Water, Grass core. That's such good defense. Like, that's a trio you will see on ladder if you boot it up right now, let alone in a draft.
And I do actually really like Chestnut. I think we talked about it in the server.
Chestnut's an interesting take. I worry about it because it's another flying weakness, and I worry that it may clash with the Moongus a bit since it's dual grass types, but it definitely could work. Overall, this team has excellent defense, and it has some pretty good support options with Pokemon like Tinkaton and obviously Gyarados. My
True.
only big concern with it is that it kind of lacks damage. You have Slitherwing, and you have, I guess, if you really wanted to go like offensive Arcanine or offensive Gyarados, like there are options there, but I really do worry that this team may not actually be able to take the KOs it needs, and it's not going to be able to outlive the opponent just on raw bulk alone.
I absolutely can see offensive Arcanine, and the Tinkaton we mentioned can do a ton of damage if you play around it correctly.
It can, but it's
Gyarados,
also possible for the opponent to play around it well, because Gigaton Hammer, being locked to once every 2 turns, if you call it right, all of a sudden you have a massive tempo swing in your favor, because you know for a fact that Tinkaton isn't doing anything offensive the next turn.
they could Ice Hammer.
I suppose that's true, but anything viably offensive is what I should have said. My bad.
There are a number of things that could be, like the Gyarados could be a Dragon Dance Gyarados.
It's possible. Again, the roster has a good amount of flexibility. I love the defensive aspect of it. It's a really solid core. I just worry about whether or not it may end up being a bit too slow for its own good.
And the Electros, I think, base 105 special attack, it is pretty slow. But
It's a bit slow,
it is,
but you do have
or
the Articuno
115,
Galar for Trick Room, so you have that option there.
115 attack. Is it?
Yeah, Electros is a very odd Pokemon in terms of its stat spread.
Its move pool is like its level up moveset learns everything at level 1, Wild Charge at level 5.
Yeah, it's one of those evolution Pokemon.
Oh dear.
You better have your heart scales.
Yep.
Regardless, so what are your final thoughts on this team, though?
It does learn Wild Charge, though. Wild Charge acrobatics, interesting. It gets Bulldoze. And actually,
Electros can do some things. I think for the C tier that it is, Electros. Sorry, I think Electros is a pretty good pick for the C tier. Definitely a solid choice.
It gets Liquidation.
What, for Terra Water Choice Band?
It has 115 attack stat.
Regardless.
Close combat.
So yeah, Electros aside, this is a discussion we can have another time. What are your overall thoughts on the Golden Goomies?
I think you might be right about the offensive issue. Again, we haven't seen their D or free agent pick.
They only have a D in each tier left. They have potential for some niche uses, potentially a decent support Pokemon. If you're relying on a D or E tier for damage, either messed up horribly in tiering, or you are certainly trying to cook.
I think the Amoonguss Arcanine Gyarados is just huge.
Oh, it's a very strong core. Don't get me wrong there. That's going to be very difficult for many teams to break.
I think that's going to carry just like on its own.
I can see that
well. And then they can go offensive. You have like Amoonguss, like I said, you could go like Dragon Dance Gyarados and Tinkaton. If you call it right, if they call your Gigatons wrong, then you get the tempo swing, and that's huge.
It's possible. I think it's definitely unreliable, but it's possible.
It's also, we mentioned, it's got good supporting moves. Fake out, feint, all that.
I think, Tinkaton, I think it's mostly a support Pokemon. Also, I don't think trying to use it as damage is a good option.
The Slitherwing is going to be good, and the Articuno Galarian could be interesting.
Articuno Galarian is nice. Another quick thing to mention before we move on to the next team, Chestnut and Slitherwing. So pretty bad stuff there due to the fact that not only do they have roll overlap, being fighting types, both are 4 times weak to flying, which you never like to see.
Yeah, Terra is definitely going to be on at least one of them each time.
Alright, so next roster. Yeah. We've spent enough time on the Golden Goomies. Next roster. You talked about Electros for like 10 minutes. Shut up. Next team, a word for the longest name of the draft. We have the Wishing Well Washing Machines, which I initially thought was in reference to, Rotom Wash. It's actually in reference to Wishy Washy. Which I guess kind of makes sense, but
Wait, that's supposed to be Wishy Washy?
Yeah, the Wishing Well Washing Machines. It's Wishy Washy.
Oh, jeez.
Yes.
Yeah, we had some fun with this one, setting everything up. Tornadus, Raichu, Brambleghast, Goodra, Beartic, Dreadnought, Spupa, Basculegion, and Revavroom.
So right off the bat, I think the most obvious thing that immediately screams here is Rain. This is a Rain team here. Absolutely. It doesn't have a Drizzle Pokemon, but Tornadus, Prankster, Rain Dance, it might as well have Drizzle. I feel like Tornadus running, that Prankster, Rain Dance is going to happen most, if not every single game. even if it doesn't end up clicking it. I think that's going to be like the number one thing to look out for. If you have the ability to stop the manual rain from going up with Tornadus, or even if you just like have a way to, change the rain on your own. Maybe you have a prankster Pokemon that underspeeds Tornadus. He sets up Rain Dance, you're slower, you set up Sandstorm or Snowscape or Sunny Day. I think this team could definitely suffer there, but overall, it's pretty alright. It's got some good threats. Basculegion and Dreadnought are great in rain. Bramblegast works if you just want to go ahead and set up Tailwind.
Goodra.
Goodra's decent damage. Spupa is a really solid use of a D tier thanks to it having, Rage Powder. And Reverie and Goodra are some interesting picks. You got your Steel type and you got your Dragon type to help round out the roster. I'm not too upset with this. This is pretty decent.
Goodra does learn Rain Dance as well, by the way.
Yes, but I imagine you'd have to be hard pressed to click it.
Yeah, you don't want to use your Goodra that way, but
yeah.
it is
a
decent
potential
backup.
option, I suppose.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even call it a decent backup, but it's something you can do to catch someone off guard.
Tornadus Raichu is great in and of itself as well.
I vaguely agree. Tornadus Raichu is fantastic, don't get me wrong, but it's really great when you have something else to prop it up with. When it's just Tornadus and Raichu and you don't have anything else that takes that great advantage, then I think it's a bit weaker. However, of course, here, it does have that. It has the Dreadnought and it has a Basculegion M. So I think Raichu is an excellent pick for this roster overall, not just for the Tornadus, but more so for, the Basculegion.
Yeah, you have 3 potential Swift Swim Pokemon.
Also true, Beartic does have Swift Swim for some reason. But yeah, very clear Rain team. Decided against drafting a Drizzle Pokemon and instead went the Tornadus route. It's interesting. We'll see how it pans out.
Absolutely. Next up, we have the Bellabog Basculin.
Yes, Bellabog Basculin.
Olive, right?
Yes, this is Olive. Very notable in the league for, one, just being a great player all around, and two, for being the person who actually founded the entire league. So everything is owed to her. She has put in an immense amount of work over the years. She's done a lot for it. And this season, she's stepping back a little bit to focus on her own things. But she's still around. We still love her. She's still going to do great. It's very telling of how good she is, just because of how great her awareness was. In the fact that she saw all these picks, right? She saw Baxcalibur, Fluttermane, Amoonguss, Tornadus. She noticed one thing was missing. One thing fell to her that I'm surprised fell this far in the first place. Of course she first picked Urshifu Rapid Strike. This thing is broken. It may not have as high of usage as Fluttermane in ladder or in tournaments, but let's be real. Fluttermane, at the very least, it's reasonable to attempt to prep for in a draft league. Urshifu? You can't intimidate it. You can rarely burn it, especially if it's just running like a Lumberry. And of course, the biggest thing, you cannot protect against this Mon. For some reason, they nerfed abilities like Transistor for a Regieleki. They didn't nerf Unseen Fist for some reason, and I imagine this is going to be a big thing. Rest of the roster, Murkrow, amazing support. Rotom Heat, another great support Pokemon and a solid fire type. Arboliva completes Fire, Water, Grass. Venomoth, a good redirector and sleeper. Dracloak, just a solid seater all around. And then the free agent slots, Iron Treads and Gengar, tons of additional damage. And Quillfish Hisui for another solid support Pokemon and Intimidate. This is, I'm not going to call it hyper offense, because that's not quite what it is. But this is a terrifying offensive team with an insane amount of support to hold up its key threats. This team, I think, was super well crafted and is going to go far.
Absolutely, and you did mention your counterplay against your Shifus would be burning them. She does have at least two different ways to burn them with Rotom Heat and Gengar. And I think Dracloak.
I'm not sure how much she's going to be burning her own Urshifu, but in the weeks where she's going to be playing against others, of course, yes, she does have that advantage. And more than that, she just has ways of preventing her own Urshifu getting burned. Again, Lumberry is an option, but she has tons of redirection. Not tons, but she has a good amount of redirection thanks to Venomoth. And she has fast Pokemon that are able to learn Safeguard, which, in the context of a draft league, is a potentially really good move.
Actually, Lime, I don't think you noticed, but in the transition to Scarlet and Violet, Urshifu did get Guts. So burning it is actually a good idea.
That isn't true?
It
What are
is
you
with skills.
talking about?
It is with skill swap.
Shut up. I don't even think that there is a Guts Pokemon on this roster that could be done with.
No, I don't think there's a
Then
skill
why'd you
swap
even?
yet.
That is infuriating. Anyways,
Oh, some people are glad I'm not playing. Lime
I'm
is one
very
of them.
glad you're not playing. Yes, I love you. You're a great guy. I am so happy I don't have to deal with you. Um, regardless, yeah, just a super solid, really well crafted offense team. I think it's going to go far. You have anything to add on to that, or is that about it?
Not really.
All
Everything,
right.
you pretty much covered everything.
Mm-hmm.
It is, although I do see, unless it is very specially orientated. Unless the Draclock goes physical, you basically only have Iron Treads, Urshifu, and maybe Quillfish as physical offense.
That's fine. Like, it's one thing to be specially oriented as a team. We'll see that later on. When you have Urshifu, your entire rest of your team can be special, and they still need to invest in massive physical bulk because that thing is stupid.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Next up, we have the Kill Team King Gambit with Iron
oh, Nilly, yes. The Kill Team King Gambit, led by Nilly, former captain of the Trick Room Academy.
with the
First
Iron.
pick, first pick Iron Hands. Great pick. Don't get me
Absolutely.
wrong. Nilly was saying in chat how they were not going to just be doing Trick Room this season, and they were going to branch up. They were going to pick more flexible Pokemon. Pick one Iron Hands, that's great. That's super flexible. I can work in a ton of different spots. It's good offensively. It's good defensively. It's good everywhere. And then pick two Pincurchin. Why? Like, are you that obsessed with the Quark Drive? Clearly not, because there's not a single other Quark Drive on the roster. It's Bisharp, Delphox, Knacklestack, Bruxish, Hydreigon, Sableye, Spidops.
So it's
So
Nilly that got Bruxish.
why even draft the Pincurchin if you're not going for Quark Drive stuff? Again, like, the Iron Hands is nice. You know, you get the electric terrain for its additional damage on its stab. It beats Spore. I'm not going to act like it's the worst pick ever. I just think that I would have much preferred to see more Quark Drive on this team to take advantage of the Pincurchin.
I know Nilly said something about that.
It's very possible. Of course, we don't have them on hand. We could dig through Discord messages, but that's not really what we're here to do right at this moment. I think that it's a solid roster overall. It has some good stuff going for it. Notably, this is basically a Trick Room team.
It's a Trick Room
Like,
team.
you could run Tailwind on Hydreigon if you really wanted to. This is a Trick Room team.
It's a Trick Room team.
It's not Trick Room Academy, but this is a Trick Room team. Next team, Colorado Choodle. This is from a new player who's just joined the league this season. Roster of Chen Pao, Gallade, Palmont, Vaporeon, Scyther, Arcanine Hisui, Abomasnow, Articuno, and Choodle. Really interesting. We have a snow team here.
I think they are also the only one in this pool that has all four of their FAs.
That is true, just because in honor of their team name being the Colorado Choodle, they decided to take Choodle as a free agent in their E-tier slot. Of course, they could have picked a different Pokemon first so that they don't have to worry about it getting taken by another person. But honestly, I respect it. It's funny. There's no reason to be that upset.
Their first pick was Choodle?
No, they did not. It was pretty late, but most people would save like their E-tier for the very end of their draft. But they decided to pick it around middle last quarter of it.
Ooh, the Scyther is an interesting pick.
Scyther's an interesting pick. I think overall is a really solid snow team, but more than just it being a snow team, it's just good offense. You have Chenpao, you have Gallade, you have Palmot, you have Arcanine Hisui. Like, this is a team that's liable to getting Intimidate spammed, but overall, this is pretty dang solid.
But it's also something to consider. How many Intimidators are you going to run into? Because
it's very true. In Draft League, yeah, your Intimidators are a lot more limited.
Landorus, what do we say? It got picked only once, and things you have to get keep in mind Quillfish, but there aren't. Looking at a bunch of teams, they don't have Intimidate, so you're pretty much fine. And I am an honest fan of Abomasnow. I know a bunch of people don't like it.
I think this season, with it being in B tier, it's a pretty good pick. If it was
Even
in A tier still, I
oh,
think it would be a
absolutely
bit
not.
underwhelming. But B tier, pretty solid. Of course, it's liable to, getting taunted if you wanted to try and set up Aurora Veil, but it's still just decent damage. It can, do all your classic stuff. It can just spam Blizzard. And I think that it's not a bad choice, especially given, the triple ice types seen on this team. Obviously, bad defensively. This is a very offensive team. But if they're able to just, get up an Aurora Veil, all of a sudden, that kind of goes away. Not to mention, the defense boost when Snow is active for their ice types. It makes it a lot easier for them to survive.
Yep. And of course, Palmot can
Yeah,
bring
Palmot's a
something
good
back.
choice. Yeah, you kill the Chen Pao? No, you didn't. What are you talking about? Still here.
And of course, you could even run a supportive move on Shinpao. I think it gets Icy Wind.
I wouldn't be surprised if most Pokemon on this roster got Icy Wind.
Yep. But a fast Icy Wind, I'll say.
Sure. I
So
think Articuno may also fill that role, but that is fair.
but you could easily lead like Shinpao Gallade, throw down
Oh
an
yeah, I
icy,
think
throw
more
down
than
an
just
icy
Chen-Pao.
wind.
Yeah, Chen-Pao Gallade, I think a more threatening lead is Chen-Pao Arcanine Hisui. That's really threatening offensively. Because, that's, a stab rock head smash with Sword of Ruin active. That's terrifying.
I was gonna say you were talking about intimidate. It almost cancels out with Qian Pao just sitting there.
This is true, but if
and
it's
if
able
you
to get cycled, then it can become a bit of an issue.
and if you don't have intimidate, Qian Pao just sits there. Gallade, Scyther, and Arcanine, they're just going to town.
I mean, it sits there until you click Mach Punch into it, but yeah.
But what learns Mach Punch? How often are you running into it?
I
That's
mean,
what.
a large amount of fighting types, but yes, exactly. The common counterplay you'd usually expect is things like, oh, just run Mach Punch, or oh, just Intimidate it. That's a big thing about Draft League because you kind of can't. You're a lot more limited on those options. There are entire rosters that don't have those whatsoever.
It is funny seeing this team next to King Gambit's.
Yes, the Kildane King Gambit, seeing the Pincurchin versus the Abomasnow.
Rather, the interaction between something like that. I just kind of glanced over the number of things if Nilly gets Trick Room up as this team wants to do. What does
You don't
Nilly
gotta
do?
rub it in. And I know we already rubbed it, but
What
Yeah, no, that is a
does
fair point. This, like I said, this is a very offensive team, and in the spirit of it being, ice centric, it's kind of glass cannony. If this team is on the back foot, I can see it struggling hard to recover. It definitely has to get off on the right foot. If they fall behind and you're in a losing position, I don't know if there's many ways that you're able to claw your way back with this roster.
Ooh, I just saw the next team and I am looking forward to it.
Yes. The Hyrule's Herdiers. This roster, man, talk about putting all your eggs in one basket. Rather, putting all your eggs in two baskets. We have Regieleki and Regidrago. Alongside that being Corviknight, Fletchinder, Quillfish, Grookey, Mimikyu, Umbreon, and Gardevoir.
This team looks like something I'm going to look out for.
I don't know. It's theoretically really strong, but its two biggest threats being Regieleki and Regidrago. You can prep for those. You bring a Fairy type, you bring a Ground type, you tear into stuff, or just you click Wide Guard, and what do? They're really strong, but they're also really simple. Simplicity can be good, but it can also lead to simple counterplay. So there's going to be a bit of balance there, and I worry that this team may struggle to break some defensive cores because Gardevoir, pretty bad stabs offensively. Obviously, Fairy's great, but Psychic doesn't really cover for anything. I guess Poison, but it's not that much of a big deal. And then Regieleki and Regidrago, outside of Terra Blast, they have no coverage. So it's a very all or nothing team,
It is incredibly top heavy with
Yes.
Regieleki, Regidrago, and then Mimikyu, Umbreon.
Mimikyu is true. Mimikyu is a good one.
Gardevoir kind of
Gardevoir is just
teeters.
okay.
It teeters because it does have good supporting moves, if I recall.
It has decent supporting moves, but it's also really frail, is the
Yeah,
issue
it's
there.
still guardable.
And you have other mons that you'd rather want your sash on, something like Fletchender, maybe. I don't
Having
know.
Fletchender and Mimikyu means you can go both Trick Room and Tailwind, which is also
This is true.
interesting.
This is
And
true.
Corviknight.
Yeah, the roster isn't bad per se. It's just like I said, very high rolly, so to speak.
Grookey has Fake Out as well. Fake Out and
Mm.
setting Grassy Terrain for Regidrago. As well.
I don't think it's that big of a deal, if I'm being entirely honest.
Oh, it's
I think
not.
Grookey is decent, but I don't think it's anything special here.
It's also decent for Regieleki. It lowers Earthquakes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Umbreon could be interesting.
Yeah. All right. Sorry about that. Yeah. So I mean, it's definitely a solid roster overall. Very all or nothing has the potential to do a lot, but at the same time, simple counterplay. Simple play, simple counterplay. We'll see if it ends up working out. Next roster, Hardened Metapods. Here we see our second Urshifu. Hooray! This is not going to be the last. In fact, it's only the halfway point in terms of Urshifu.
This one is the single strike.
Yes, this is single strike Urshifu, complemented with Moltres, Flamigo, Fungus, Sneasel, Mischievous, Kricketune, Tatsugiri, and Dondozo. So, this is what I was saying. Not only do you have to prep for Dondozo, you have to prep for Dondozo and Urshifu's single strike, which I think that's pretty scary. Dondozo and Tatsugiri lowering the opportunity cost where you can have an S plus or an S alongside them, that may end up being too much. We'll see how this ends up working out.
And as well, they have Flamigo.
They do also have the Flamigo if they want to do something silly like Mistress Paris Song or just give the Tatsugiri a Toxic Orb.
It is, of course, something you can do.
It's something to look out for. It's definitely one thing that like you only ever get a game off it, but it's a best of 3 set, and you know if you play like really standard, solid games for the first couple weeks and then pulled out in like week 4 or week 5, it's very possible that people just get completely thrown off guard by it. If they just sort of like forget that you have that Flamigo in the first place and they don't play around it.
Urshifu also has Sword Stance.
What does that Urshifu not have? Keys to my house? Nope, it has those too.
It doesn't need keys to your house. It just goes through the door.
Yeah, but it's like solid oak. He doesn't want to pay for that. It's expensive. It's not
Unseen
actually
Fist.
solid oak.
No.
Well, regardless
Fungus.
of whether or not
Having
Urshifu
Fungus.
allies with Parry the Platypus. Yeah, Fungus is definitely a solid option. It complements Urshifu single strike well, just being a solid redirector, spread spore, and again, it's one of those mons that in normal play would be pretty underwhelming, but in the context of Draft League, Fungus is really solid, and it's surprisingly hard to break. Its stats aren't that high, but give it an Eviolite, it has a really good defensive typing, it has Regenerator. This is something you can't knock until you try and knock it out. And you don't for 3 turns. And it's sporing you and rage powdering the whole time. This thing's annoying. The reason I took it.
Fungus next to Urshifu, next to Moltres.
It's solid. It's a good it's just a good core. And of course, put it alongside Dondozo. Like that's good firewater grass pretty much,
Even Dondozo on its own without Tatsugiri could be good.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking there. Dondozo, still just a decent mon. It can just set up on its own. It's bulky. It has access to things like, breast. It's not bad.
Yep. And of course, next up we have the Bodacious Bulbasaurs.
Yes, coach of this. Coach of this being #1 Screamtail fan.
Amelia. With Rillaboom, Sneasler, Magnezone, Slowbro, Rotom Fan, Altaria, Hisuian Typhlosion, Ditto, and Overquill.
Yep, as I mentioned, Rillaboom Sneasler, I don't like this existing. But hey, I was outvoted. I'm not going to say, actually, I'm lead staff. My word means more. No, I'm not going to try and say that at all. I'll give my opinion, but I'm not going to act like it matters more than everyone else's in this context. It happened. It's drafted. It's going to be terrifying. This thing...
If you are a coach in the server, you can participate mid-season in tiering discussions. And I do know that Amelia was popping off in tiering discussions.
Yes, yes. In between seasons, of course, after the format gets announced, people, even if you haven't competed, if you're new to the Discord, you're obviously allowed to throw in your hat into the ring and just give your thoughts of like what tiering changes may have happened. Amelia, as was mentioned, was one person who helped a lot with it. I don't recall where she sided on the Sneasler thing, but hey, regardless of how it ended up, regardless of how she voted, it ended up in A, and so Rillaboom Sneasler, scary.
Based on how
Um,
she drafted, I would assume the lower tier.
it's possible. Overall, though, that aside, this team is just okay.
Interesting.
I think it's decent. It's all right. You got a solid Firewater Grass core. You got a Steel type. My
You got
biggest
Ditto.
complaint with it, yeah, you got Ditto. My biggest complaint with it is just the fact that it really, really lacks speed control. So, I mean, Sneasler has the potential to just blitz people, but I don't know if it's going to be able to do that, or if it blitzing people is going to be enough when the rest of the team sort of struggles. It's in that sort of like mid-speedy range. You have Slowbro for Trick Room, but a lot of the mons don't actually like it that much.
I was going to
Typhlosion
say
Hisui's kind of fast, Rillaboom's kind of fast.
if Slowbro had Icy Wind, I was going to say Slowbro, Icy
Mm,
Wind, Rotom Fan, uh, what is it, Electroweb?
I don't even think it gets Electro Web. No, I think it's just Underwave. And like, it's fine, it's something, but it's not a lot, and I feel like that may end up hurting the roster.
Yeah, it's definitely not one for speed.
Mm.
However, I think if it gets opportunities to just use powerful moves, it can and probably will do damage if it does.
It has good damage and it has good power plays. The question is just how much are you going to get those power plays compared to or the times you're just going to get knocked out before you get to do anything. It's an alright team overall. We're going to see how it pans out.
I do think
I think it's definitely a
Slowbro
bit
will be
lacking
big
on
with it.
speed control, but hey, it could end up working.
I think Rillaboom Slowbro will be big with it. Sneasler, of course.
It could be. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of Slowbro on this roster. I'll be entirely honest.
Neither am I, but
Yeah,
it is what's drafted.
yeah. It's
And
what's on the roster. We'll see how it works out.
and I do want to say, if Lime and I say we don't like something on a draft, that's just our opinion.
Yes, that is a very good point to bring up, and thank you for doing so. I consider myself a pretty decent draft player. I have won a season previous, but that does not mean I'm all knowing. I have made some pretty dumb calls. I've lost a lot of matches. I'm by no means an expert, so to speak. Me giving my opinion, as I mentioned before, I'm very biased. Like, for example, the Hyrule Hurriers roster, the double Regieleki Regidrago, it's good. I'm not going to act like it's bad. I personally just may find myself being a bit more critical of it because I personally have a bias towards defensive Pokemon and defensive teams. So seeing something like that, which is super heavily offensive and super high rolly, I may not have a liking to. That doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It just means I don't. Speaking too fast. That just means I don't like it, and
I'm
that's
somewhere
not inherently a bad thing.
I'm somewhere between insanity and oh, this team looks cool.
Very true. Uh, if if Smeargle tells you to take a Pokemon,
Don't do it.
chances are that means don't take that Pokemon. He's the devil on your shoulder telling you to take Chansey, pick 3.
Pick 3. You think I'm waiting that long?
You had to get through traffic.
True.
Regardless. Next roster. Athens Victines. Annihilate, Azumarill, Orthworm, Mudsdale, Vivillon, Girafford, Salamence, Rotom, Moe.
I do
Pretty
want to
good.
say their logo looks pretty cool.
Yes, Athens Victini's logo. There is a art channel where people were able to post their logos. Some were absolutely beautiful, some were less beautiful. When I say some were less beautiful, I mean mine. It's literally just the art of a TCG card with the team name plastered on it. But some people made them look absolutely beautiful, and yeah, Athens Victini is one of them. Speaking of their roster, though,
They're another
it's good.
Annihilate.
Yes, they are another Annihilate. Notably, they built it a bit differently than me. They went for a lot more generalist. They just have solid, reliable Pokemon. They have things like the Azumarill, like the Salamence, things like that that are able to just put work in on their own. So while I think the team, at least I personally think the team lacks synergy overall, it's just good stuff, and you're never going to complain too much about good stuff.
Of course not.
Yeah, I think it's a very solid way of building it, and I think it has potential to pan out very well. This is not a team that I'm going to sleep on whatsoever.
Nope. It definitely looks like a team that, like on its own, would make it a good portion through the series.
It's entirely possible this team makes playoffs. Like, there's only so much you can do when turn one you're staring down Salamence Azumarill. What play do you make there? Is the Salamence tailwinding? Is the Azumarill belly drumming? Is the Salamence dragon dancing? Is it swords dancing? Is it just going to click Draco Meteor? Is it going to Earthquake? I don't know.
And
Is the Azumarill going to switch into Earthworm and Salamence clicks Earthquake? I don't know. This team is pretty good. It has a lot of solid lines it can take. So while it may not be super heavy on individual synergy between Mons, I think it's very good overall, personally speaking.
of course, if they lead Vivian, and you...
Yeah, Vivillon.
Vivian and Azumarill, even Annihilate. Annihilate could be a bulky bulk up.
Yeah, just run Bulk Up or Swords Dance, have Rage Powder turn one, just start clicking Drain Punch after, you're chilling.
Or it could be a Scarf Final Gambit.
That is very true. Annihilate is a scary Pokemon just because of the variety of sets it can run.
And of course, like, if it Final Gambits next to Azumarill belly drumming or Salamence dragon dancing, even Rotom-Mow Nasty Plot.
Yeah, there's a lot it can do.
Is scary.
I think it's a good roster overall. Definitely one to look out for.
Absolutely.
Speaking of rosters to look out for, my goodness, I think that Timid Tailwind, aka Hazel, and her team, the Forsaken City Frogadiers, is horrifying. This feels like a war crime. For reference, this team is Chi-Yu, Klefki, Toedscruel, Noivern, Zorua Hisui, Greninja, Lilligant, and Sudowoodo. I mean, this is a team that makes you wish you could bring 6 Assault Vests, and that may end up being a bad thing. Because, it's very possible that you just invest super heavily in special defense, and that helps counteract the team a lot. But even with that being the case, there's so much damage here. You have Chi-Yu, you have Greninja, you have Lilligant, and then you have, Klefki for screens and support, you have Toedscruel for Spore, it can set up Trick Room, Noivern has Tailwind, Sudowoodo can just do a bunch of damage if you don't invest in a physical defense, especially if Trick Room is up. Rockhead Head Smash, that's pretty good, even off base 100 attack, it's still stab. This team is scary. It's very offensive, and it may be a bit fragile, not just in terms of bulk, but in terms of, you get a lead wrong, or you get a turn wrong, you're down on position, and it may struggle to get back up from there. So it's not perfect.
Chi-Yu on its own is huge.
Chi-Yu on its own. I mean, yeah. I don't think we need to go into too much detail on this one. This is just a good roster. Like I said, this team would make me bring 6 Assault Vests if I was allowed to.
And this was the team that we mentioned previously, the Chi-Yu Greninja.
Yeah, Chi-Yu Greninja, very scary interaction. You have the Beads of Ruin to lower their special defense, and then things like, loaded dice with Water Shuriken, its priority. It has an effective base power of like 75, boost that by stab. You're basically clicking Grassy Glide that also breaks, Sturdy and Sash. This thing is scary, man. You have Protean, you have Terra, there's a lot that can be done here.
Greninja is scary sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And also, don't forget Lilligant. This thing can just sit in your face and quiver dance behind Klefki screens. I don't want to deal with that, do you?
No, and if Klefki, I think does it get Sunny Day?
Let me double check that actually. I believe it does.
Because you could just Sunny Day Sleep Powder if you really wanted to.
Yep, you can just Klefki Sunny Day Sleep Powder. That's also a completely viable line. This roster has a lot going for it.
It is really scary.
I think it's up there. Yeah.
Definitely a team I'm going to look at.
Yes, I think it's definitely up there in terms of like one of the best offensive teams we have in the league at the moment. Now,
and Miami Heatran is up next with Heatran, Quavel, Haxorus, Slowking, Galar, Florges, Oricorio, Moltres Galar, and Brute Bonnet.
Yes, Miami Heatran, the very last team in Pool A before we go down to Pool B. It's solid overall. It's Miami Heatran, it has Heatran. What more can you ask for?
Heatran is scary.
Yes, that joke aside, you have solid Firewater Grass Core between Brute Bonnet and Quaquaval. You have, the Florges and the Haxorus for some good stuff there. Slowking Galar is good Trick Room setting. It makes Heatran, all very threatening there. Moltres Galar, it's just scary overall. Turn 1 lead, you're staring down like Moltres Galar and Brute Bonnet. Yeah, if you have a Fairy type, you're pretty happy, but it's not uncommon for one of them to, switch their Terra to something else, like Moltres Galar being Terra Flying, or even Brute Bonnet being like Terra Poison.
Or even both just living it naturally.
Yeah, both, they're not frail by any means. I think, this roster is just decent overall. It's missing some key things, but It has its Firewater Grass. It has its Steel Fairy Dragon. It's just pretty decent defensively. It's got some good bulk, and it's got really good damage all around. Again, it's one of those rosters that may be a bit lacking on speed control, but I don't think that's that big of a deal, all things considered, because these mods are just so generically good.
Absolutely. And if you are facing another team that doesn't have great speed control, you have some very fast options.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. If you're facing another team, like for example the Bodacious Bulbasaurs, and neither team is super strong in their speed control, you can just, depending on how both players build, it's entirely possible that one just like completely takes the lead and is able to run over the other.
And
It
I'm
definitely feels like one of those rosters that can just allow that to happen.
and I'm always just scared of Heatran.
It's good. There's a reason it's an S plus.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And
All
then of
right.
course the
So
next. All right.
before we move on to Pool B, let's just go ahead and give a quick recap. Saucy Spidops, Dance Dragonites, Golden Goomies, Wishing Well Washing Machines, Bellevog Basculin, Kill Team King Gambit, Colorado Choodle, Hyrule Herdier, Harden Metapod, Audacious Bulbasaur, Athens Victinis, Forsaken City Frogadiers, and Miami Heatran. I would like to know, out of Pool A, what is your personal favorite team?
Ooh, I think
Maybe it's your favorite to pilot. Maybe you like the theory behind it. I want to know, out of all of these, not necessarily which one would you take if you were to replace a player, just which one is your favorite?
the scariest is going to be the Frogadiers.
Interesting. Okay, that's fair.
I am just in love with the Hyrule's Herdiers though.
That's fair. That's fair. I can see that.
But like every these teams are drafted very well.
I agree.
Um,
There's definitely some very good stuff here.
couple questions I might have, but that's just me.
Sure. As I expressed earlier, I think Golden Goomies is a very solid team. I like defense, and this is a defensive team. I'm concerned it may lack damage, but there are plenty of sets these Pokemon can run to help make up for that. I look forward to seeing how this does. I think out of Pool A, with my personal bias, Golden Goomies is my favorite. Which is the scariest is a different question, though. I think I would probably pin that on the Bellebog Basculin. Player is very good. As we mentioned, Olive, leader of the league, she's a very good player. Has placed well in most seasons, making it to playoffs almost every single time. And just this roster, horrifying. Like Urshifu, Rapid Strike, and Murkrow. What more do you need to know? But then on top of that, there's so much more. There's so much good support that all hones in and lifts up its few strong offensive options. You know?
Absolutely.
All right. So, with that, we're going to go ahead and finish up today's episode, this being the first one, by going over the B tier. Of course, we're going to try not to skim over it, but I will say, to break the immersion for a moment, it is getting a bit late, so we do apologize if our analysis isn't quite as thorough as it was in Pool A, but we're going to try and keep it up regardless.
Of course, and we start off with the New Zealand Zekrom, which is a fun name, by the
Mm-hmm.
way, with
Yes, good alliteration.
Fluttermane, Palmot, Grifei, Dunsparce, Charizard, Magneton, Luminion, Gothitelle, Brute Bonnet, Wigglytuff, and Shinx. I will say
Yes,
most of these teams have actually filled out their rosters.
not most. Only 5 of the 13 people in Pool B. But yes, it did move a little bit faster than Pool A. So, if I'm not mistaken, everyone is only missing one Pokemon or is fully complete. So, there is a bit more certainty that we can speak on.
Absolutely.
Regardless, New Zealand Zekrom, Fluttermane. As
Fluttermane,
was mentioned, Fluttermane's really good, but I actually am really concerned here because it feels really similar to the Dancing Dragonites and how it's structured. It feels pretty heavy on the Trick Room. You have mobs like Dunsparce and Magneton and Gothitelle and Brute Bonnet. And don't get me wrong, like, Trick Room is great, and the Perish Trap option, this time having Gothitelle instead of Gothorita, it's good, but I am questioning, like, is this the best way to run Gothitelle in draft? Because the people who got Fluttermane, sorry, not Gothitelle, Fluttermane, the people who got Fluttermane in both pools ended up taking this route, so I don't know, were they just sort of, like, trying to go for something similar? Were they, peeking at each other's notes? It's hard to say. It's weird to see Fluttermane not on just, like, a hard offensive roster.
I I mostly agree. I'm looking at picks like Charizard and saying, yeah, this is another fasting, but at the same time, that's one out of the 10 other than Fluttermane. So you
Mm-hmm.
could have a fast mode, but I kind of agree. Fluttermane, if it's not on a hard offensive team, like it's of course Fluttermane.
Yeah, it's great in everything. It has, nearly 80% usage in the current format for a reason, but this is a bit different. This isn't quite the same. And it losing most of what it wants to work with, that being offensive Pokemon, I wonder how it's going to end up playing. I really do.
Like you can of course support it, having it next to Palmont's
Hmm.
Fake Out, Gothitel's Fake. Like you have Fake Out Cycling, um, and Fluttermane. Like you could of course just punch holes. But if the Fluttermane goes down and you planned around Fluttermane being your hole puncher, you don't have a lot to work with.
Yeah, I mean, you run out of staples, the stack of papers just fall around.
This team looks like it has a lot of supportive options as well. I
It
might
does. It's
I
very
might be
heavy on
misremembering.
support. It's possible. Like, there's still stuff it can do. Aside from Fluttermane, you do have Palmont, do have to Dunsparce, you do have Brute Bonnet, which, reminding, it does have a very high attack stat and Sucker Punch, so watch out for that thing.
Yeah,
Still has Spore, too.
even Wigglytuff.
Wigglytuff isn't terrible.
Charizard is decent without Sun. If Grafaya gets Sunny Day, the Charizard could be really dangerous.
Mhm.
Without Sun, it might be a bit lackluster.
Let me go ahead and verify this.
Grafaya is kind of a loose cannon anyway.
He does have Sunny Day. That is worth noting. So
Interesting.
there is something you could potentially do there. You don't have, like, an abuser like Lilligant.
Uh, Wait, actually, what on the team learns Trick Room? Because this might just be a slow
I
team.
believe it's just Wigglytuff Gothitelle, and I agree. I think it is a slow team. I think this is a Trick Room team, and that was just my big question: is this the best way to build Flutter Main? Because this is the second Flutter team that's going this route. We don't know. We're going to see how it pans out. I could be right. I could be wrong. Hey, Dancing Dragonites, New Zealand Zekrom, Tenacity, Jaggy, you're the coaches of these teams. Prove me wrong. Get some
Teams,
wins.
teams to
Kick
watch out
my
for.
ass.
Teams to watch out for, definitely.
And that goes to everyone else as well. I should talk your team. I say something bad. I say something you disagree with.
That
Kick
means
my ass.
that means it's
Go
actually a
ahead.
good team.
Prove me right or prove me wrong. And to the people who I say have really good teams, kick my ass. Prove me right. I want to be right.
He has a god complex, please.
Nuh-uh. Anyways,
Next up, we
next team.
have a personal favorite of Lime's, the Santa
What? There's
Maria,
no reason for that.
the
Yes, the
Santa
Santa
Maria
Maria
Samurai.
Samurai. That being my team, I can give my own thoughts on it, but I think I'm going to leave most of the speculatory stuff to Smeargle just because, I mean, come on. There's quite literally no possible way for me to discuss my team without being overwhelmingly biased.
As
So,
well as
Smeargle, if you'd like to go ahead and, share some thoughts on the roster.
so Lime is the other Annihilate drafter, as well as Tornadus Therian, Fungus, Klefki, Sneasel, Donphan, Slowpoke Galarian, Rotom Washing Machine, Armorage, Tauros, and Oshawott.
Mhm.
So I have talked with Lime a little bit about this, and I know a couple things that he can do with his team that are incredibly scary. Overall, this team is pretty actually scary. Having Klefki for screens, Thunderwave, um, even weather control if you're up against a team that might want to set their own weather, like the Colorado Choodles Abomasnow. The Klefki can just say no. Having Fungus and Klefki is pretty dangerous. Annihilate is just dangerous in of itself. The Armorage is actually somewhat interesting. What were you thinking with the Armorage? Is that
Uh,
just with the
I
Slowpoke?
don't. I'm unsure what Armorage. I've never heard of that Pokemon, but Armor Rouge, yeah, I've had a couple of ideas with it. For one, it was just to complete my Fire Water Grass core between Fungus and Slowpoke Galar. It's a good Trick Room Pokemon. It's another mid-speed Pokemon to sort of fit with the whole theme of it's essentially I'm going to choose not to go too into depth on all my thoughts for obvious reasons, but essentially, yeah, it's meant to be this sort of like hybrid Tailwind Trick Room team with a lot of mid-speed Pokemon so that they can fill into both of those roles. And Armarouge just felt like it fit that very well as, being a fire type. And I picked it pretty late. I believe it was 7th pick, and it was one of the few fire types left. And I mean, I'm pretty happy with that because even though it was left really late, in fact, I believe I'm the only person who drafted it, period. I think it's pretty solid. It's only an A tier, where previously there were talks of putting it in S tier. Of course, that was before this format was revealed. If we knew that this was going to be the format from the start, then obviously that would never have happened. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's a pretty decent Pokemon overall. It's just got good damage. It's got a pretty decent typing for my roster, and it just filled the roles I wanted it to fill.
You could do something with Sneasel and Armarouge weakness policy weak armor.
Sure.
Even if you wanted a slow weakness policy, Oshawott gets Aqua Jet, I believe.
That is true. Yep.
Tornadus Therian is also an interesting pick.
Mm-hmm. All I'm going to say for now, Tornadus Therian is a money move. That's all I'm going to elaborate with there.
Yeah, no need to give away any of your tricks.
Tornadus Therian is a money move. I'll be popping bottles, sparkles, and champagne. Yes.
Prove me right.
I will prove myself right. At least I hope I do. I could just play terribly. It's always an option. Regardless, next lineup, yes. The Nottingham Nickets.
With
another new player to the league, and I'm going to go ahead and stop interrupting Smeargle. I apologize.
We've been doing it all night. The Nottingham Nickets with Urshifu Rapid Strike. Another Urshifu Murkrow pairing, actually.
Yes. More than just Urshifu Murkrow, another Urshifu Rapid Strike and Murkrow. I feel like there might have been a little bit of notes peeking there.
With Raichu, Rotom Mow, Fortress, Palisand, Slowpoke, Salamence, Hisuian Typhlosion, and Colossal.
I think, obviously, the big thing to look at here is the Urshifu, but I think another really notable thing here is the core of Urshifu, Murkrow, Raichu. I think Raichu is an excellent pick here. It's another fake out user. It's fast nuzzle. It has charm. It has like some really good support options, and it has lightning rod, which makes one of the few ways to stop Urshifu mute. And there's already so few ways to stop Urshifu. Like, just make this thing Terra Water for extra damage on your Surging Strikes. All of a sudden, you only beat to 2 types. One of them, Raichu just draws right in. What, are you going to run Discharge? No, you're not. Shut up.
And then even if you have a ton of grass resists as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Rotom, Mow, Fortress. You have the Salamence, the Typhlosion Hisui. The Colossal is actually neutral. Ignore me there. But yeah, no, like this team is pretty well crafted overall. It has some defensive Pokemon, but they're very slow. These being, Fortress and Palisand. I think Salamence providing Intimidate could be useful to the roster, but overall, it's just, some scary offense. Raichu's a great partner for Urshifu, it's a great partner for Murkrow, and it makes the lines to play around it a lot trickier.
Do we think Colossal is going to be a big player?
It is possible.
Not a big player, but it used to be a Dynamax player.
Yeah, it used to be a Pokemon that won a season because of Gmax Colossal being so silly. I think there's one line that Colossal takes here. That is, you lead it alongside Slowpoke, you protect the Colossal, you set up Trick Room, and then you surf. And you activate Weakness Policy. I don't think that Steam Engine is going to be doing a lot here.
You also proc Steam Engine?
That's why it has abilities other than Steam Engine.
True.
Yes, it does still have Flash Fire and Flame Body.
Flash Fire and Lightning Rod on the same team are actually pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely neat. Of course, Flash Fire doesn't draw things in like Lightning Rod does, but it's still pretty cool. Alright. So yeah, definitely a solid team overall.
Absolutely. Definitely. And this is what we were talking about with the Raichu previously. Raichu Thundurus is, of course, a great pick. Raichu Thundurus with nothing really to...
Tornadus.
I'm sorry, my bad. Yeah. Raichu Tornadus is, of course, good pairing. But Raichu Urshifu is just so much more.
Mm-hmm.
And next up we have the Children of Arceus.
Yes, but we are all God-loving children in this household. We're definitely not. Um, let's not finish this joke. Uh, yes,
Oh,
Volcarona, Samurott
good.
Hisui, Corviknight, Umbreon, Whiscash, Altaria, Igglybuff, Iron Treads, Hydreigon, Chansey, and Dratini.
You're
Of course, we
so
already know this is your favorite roster in the whole league because it has
you're
Chansey
and Umbreon.
and Umbreon. This is true. Yeah, it's definitely a solid team overall. It has some very versatile mons. Mons like Volcarona and Hydreigon are super versatile. It's
Um,
just decent balance all around, but I have one big problem with this team, personally speaking. And that's while the mons are versatile and there's a lot of roles they can fill, this roster is littered with 4 times weaknesses. Notably having, let's see, you have Volcarona, you have Whiscash, you have Altaria, and you have Hydreigon. That is 4 Pokemon with a 4 times weakness. So the captain of this team is going to need to use really smart Terra usage in order to get around that deficit, because obviously, Terra helps with an issue like that, but when there are 4 Pokemon all grasping at it, it definitely gets a bit harder to justify using it in any one way.
of
And
course, you
that's
don't
not
have
even
to use
counting.
all four of these Pokemon at once.
It's true, but a lot of them are your big power play Pokemon. Like, you want to bring Pokemon like Volcarona and Hydreigon. They're, your S tier and your A tier. Those are Pokemon that you don't want to leave behind.
It
So
is
having those
notable as
Pokemon.
well. One Pokemon's 4x weakness is another Pokemon's resistance.
This is true. You do have Whiscash being 4 times weak to grass, and then Altaria and Hydreigon and Volcarona all resist grass. Like, it's not crippling. I'm not going to act like that this team is terrible because of it. I'm just saying it's going to be a big thing that the coach is going to have to look out for, and it's going to require some smart play to alleviate this issue.
I do hope to coach them with the Chansey pick, though.
I am going to make sure that you cannot say a word to this person, lest they fall under your influence.
Chansey is a pick.
Unfortunately.
Next up, we have
Uh,
the Spike. I'm not going to continue with that
you're
because
good. You're good.
we could
Yes,
talk about the team more, but there's not too much
it's just
exactly to
pretty solid.
say.
Yeah,
It is a
it's
solid
good
team.
balance. It's good balance. It has some good type cores. It just has a lot of forex weaknesses, and that may end up being a big detriment to the team. We'll see how the coach plays.
Yep.
Next team, Spikemuth Sylveons. We have our second Iron Hands team. This one also featuring Iron Jugulis, Delphox, Gardevoir, Flapple, Fletchling, Girafarig, Gyarados, Scizor, Venomoth, and Ruber Paldea. Interestingly, compared to the Kill Team King Gambit, this has 2 Quark Drive Pokemon. Oh, an Open Gurchin.
I
Yeah, this
believe
roster is pretty solid. It's a really good defensive Trick Room team, it feels.
I
You
believe
have the
both
option
Iron
to
Hands.
tail.
I believe both Iron Hands also have Delphox.
That is true,
Yes,
actually. Yes.
that's interesting.
But yeah, so it's a solid team overall. You have a pretty good split tail room option. You have things like Iron Jugulis and Sizzle to set up Tailwind, and then you also have things like Delphox and Gardevoir and Girafarig to set up Trick Room. And some really good mid-speed Pokemon. As we said, Iron Hands, Scizor, Gyarados, just good defensive Pokemon. Venomoth for redirection. Flapple to potentially take some cheeky kills. Fletchling for immediate Tailwind if you absolutely need it in some matchups. This is a pretty well-crafted roster, all things considered.
I think Fletchling is actually a really cool Pokemon in draft.
I think it's pretty solid, yeah.
Like,
It's not my favorite due to how linear it is, but even if it is linear, it's good at what it does, and it's only in C tier.
I was about
You
to
can only be
say,
so upset about that,
you
yeah.
know what it's going to do, but it's going to do that almost every time.
Exactly, and it does it well.
Yep.
So yeah, I think it's definitely a solid roster overall. It's going to be difficult to build around this team, not for the coach, but for their opponents, because again, the 2 modes are so far gone from each other, right? Like, let's say you are hard calling it. You're saying, all right, they're absolutely bringing Trick Room into my roster. That just makes sense. Then you load up, you see Iron Hands, Iron Jugulis, Gyarados, Venomoth, Flapple, Fletchling, like something like that. Like, you're just like, like this is a roster where you have the potential to just completely draft, or not draft, but you have the potential to completely just build incorrectly because of how wildly different the 2 modes are.
It is also to note they can bring both at once. Things like Iron Hands, Gyarados,
It's
Scizor
also true, yeah.
can be
Nothing's
built
stopping them.
like Scizor. it doesn't have to run speed in Tail Room. Most of what it
Mm-hmm.
clicks is either Bullet Punch or it might run Trailblaze.
This is true. And again, Scizor itself could just run Tailwind if it really wanted to.
Oh, it has Tailwind?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, Scizor. You could see Scizor Fletchling next to each other.
I've
Scizor
been
sets
I've been running
down.
Tailwind Scizor since Gen 6. That thing's silly.
Since Gen 6, I've been running Mega, so
Fair.
I haven't quite used it as my Tailwind setter.
Mm-hmm. Regardless, yeah, it's definitely a solid roster. I like it a lot. Obviously, I'm going to be very biased when saying like what my favorite team is for because I'm very happy with how my draft turned out.
Yeah,
But I
you
think
don't
Spike
get
and Sylveon,
to.
yeah, it's one of it's definitely one of my favorites. It's super well built. I enjoy it a lot. My only big concern is that Gardevoir feels like it's stepping on the toes of Delphox and Girafarig a lot. Like I feel like it's not really contributing a lot, but I could be wrong there. It could just be used as this fast offensive fairy type, and that's a perfectly fine role to fill. Just because there's 3 psychic types doesn't mean it's inherently a bad thing. One of them isn't weak to dark. One of them is immune to ghost. Like they don't actually share their weaknesses that badly.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a good roster overall.
Absolutely.
Next up, we have the Stockholm Sprigatitos with Landorus Therian, everyone's favorite, Wordier, Arboliva, Copperajah, Dreadnought Berserker, Steenie, Basculegion Male, Pelipper, and Shroomish. We got the Mish. And we have another rain team, this time opting to not go with the Tornadus idea that the Wishing Well washing machines had gone for, but rather just going with a more traditional rain. You have the Pelipper, get the drizzle up, and then you go from there. You have your Dreadnought, you have your Basculegion M. If you really wanted to, even doing something like Terra Water Landorus Therian and Terra Blasting that in rain, that's really scary when you think about it.
And unlike other teams, I believe Wordier has Intimidate.
Yes, this team has double Intimidate, which is
So you
very notable.
can't
That's
cycle.
quite a rare trait. You just got to watch out for any Defiant Pokemon that somebody may try and run against you. But yeah, it's quite scary.
If you're running Defiant, you just lead Rain, though.
Yeah, no, exactly. It
has
makes you hesitant
options.
to bring certain Pokemon, but yeah, this team, it has depth. It's quite nice. It, of course, lacks a good fire type, which definitely does hurt, but you have a lot of the other things you want. You have your grass, you have a steel, you have
2 steals.
your weather. Yeah, that's true, actually. If they really wanted to, they could just do something like Berserker Copperajah and get that Steely Spirit boost to Copperajah's Heavy Slam. It's goofy, but hey, that could have some calc implications that I'm not thinking of.
Yep, whenever I see Berserker, I do look for a second steel type. But of course, a number of these Pokemon might Terra into steel.
Also very true, yeah. Something like Arboliva or even Dreadnought, really?
It might
I mean, hell,
it,
you see like Landorus Therian Terra into steel. If it's like bulky, give it leftovers maybe, that can be pretty hard to break, all things considered, especially with all the Intimidates flying around.
or just simply for the offensive option, not for defensive.
It's true, yeah. It gives it a dual utility here.
Yep. Berserker also has moves, I believe it has Fake Out.
It does, yes. It's just a very slow fake out, so other fake outs will actually end up being it. But hey, it's still solid.
Yep, and
it still forces the opponent to fake out into it.
Yep. And overall, good team.
Mm-hmm. I like it. It's pretty decent. Like I said, I think Terra Water Landers is definitely something to look out for. I feel like that could be pretty scary in rain, but it's a good roster overall. Next up, the Dublin Doublades.
With Regieleki, Moltres Galarian, Overquill, Hisuian Decidueye, Beartic, Dugtrio, Tinkatuff, Sableye, a Galarian Zapdos, and Phalanx.
And wow, I just want to say, I think more than any of the others we'd seen, this roster here is the definition of a glass cannon. This is super fast, both in terms of speed stats and the overall tempo from Pokemon like Zapdos Galar, Moltres Galar, Regieleki. This is a team that if it gets a good turn one, it can just steamroll you, and there's nothing you can do. But at the same time, it's pretty frail overall, and its support Pokemon in Overquill and Sableye, while they're pretty decent, it's definitely a struggle for the two of them to hold up the rest of the roster. So if you're playing from behind, it can be a struggle. But hey, you don't really got to care about that. You just simply point a gun in their face. What are they going to do? Stab you? Who cares? You have a gun in their face.
Yeah, they, especially options like Doug Trio, because we don't have Arena Trap or Shadow Tag banned. So,
Correct. This is VGC rules. Those are both allowed. There's a reason Paris Trap exists.
so Doug Trio has some very cool implications.
It could make it so that if you get a really good lead, then the opponent just has to hold that.
I am
Granted, things like ghost types and levitate and flying types can get around that, but still, it's something you got to be conscious of.
Yep. I am looking forward to seeing the Decidueye, actually, because that
Yep.
was something I was looking at for competitive. And Hisui and Decidueye, as a TCG player,
It's just okay in TCG. Let's not oversell it that much for the people who don't know any better. It's just okay.
it only won Worlds.
It's just okay.
it is I was saying it is a
No,
personal
it's very
favorite.
it's very good. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty solid. It's obviously very slow, but when you have things like Regieleki, that's not as much of a concern, gotta say.
Yep, and you have Regieleki, Electroweb, Moltres, Galarian, Tailwind.
Yeah, Tinkatuff, Thunderwave. Like, there's a lot going
even
on.
Sableye.
Yep, even Sableye. I believe it still gets Clash. I believe so.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on here. I think this roster is another very scary offensive team. I think it's up there with like the Forsaken City Frogadiers and the Bellabog Basculin as those like really scary offensive teams that you got to look out for.
I would actually really love to see the Double Aids versus the Frogadiers. I don't know in the league if they meet, and we will because of how we're doing it.
Yep, because of the nature of Swiss, there's no way to know until it happens.
But I would like to see that happen.
It'd be cool, yeah. Next roster, the Frostpunk Frostmoths. Good alliteration, it's fun. And I think this is another just pretty good team. It's all very solid, bulky, mid-speed Pokemon that are looking to capitalize off the best Tailwind user you could ever ask for. You have a Azumarill, you have the Arcanine Hisui, you have things like Muck, Alola, you have Goodra, Florges, like, you have a couple other very fast Pokemon, like, Electrode, Hisui, and Azelf, but just overall, it's just good, solid Pokemon that are really nice under Trick Room. Hard to complain.
Azumarill under Trick Room is a thing of nightmares.
Yeah, this is also true. You do have the Trick Room option with things like Azelf, and I believe even Florges can take advantage of it pretty well, all things considered.
Yep, a number of these things can be trained to just not be fast.
Mm-hmm. There's very true.
And you have Persian, I believe, Fake Out.
Yes, Persian has Fake Out. It has, I think it may have Icy Wind, or that might just be the Alola version. Let me fact check that. Nope, it does hold Icy Wind, even in the Kanto form. Okay.
I do believe this is the team in the server we were talking about Azumarill fainting and Muck Alola coming in.
Yes, power of alchemy to copy huge power. It's a gimmick more than anything, but hey, it could end up working. It's definitely a funny gimmick more than anything else.
Absolutely. But it is something that could happen.
Yeah, definitely a solid roster overall. If it doesn't get Tailwind up, or if the opponent is able to just play smart and they're play defensive and they wait for Tailwind to peter out, then this team definitely falls short a bit. But I think it's pretty good overall, and playing around those few turns of Tailwind is going to be a struggle for most rosters.
Absolutely.
All right. Next up, we have the Tartarus Tandemaus. This being Garchomp, Talonflame, Articuno Galar, Pachirisu, Stantler, Mischievous, Marrow, Sylveon, Sneasler, and Gogo. We have Sylveon, the Pokemon that just won Worlds. Woo-hoo, let's go, trans rights.
We have Garchomp and Talonflame next to each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely very scary. I think overall the team is just okay. It's lacking a strong steal option, and defensively it has a couple of holes that it really would like to have liked to get filled. But it has some really strong offensive options. I think that like the Chomp, the Sylveon, and the Sneasler are really going to have to carry this roster.
Even Talonflame is pretty offensive.
Talonflame definitely can click buttons, but I think like it setting up Tailwind and then those three going from there are really what's going to let this roster thrive more than anything else. Like, yeah, it has other stuff it can do. It has some good defensive options with things like Stantler, and Eviolite Mischievous is pretty bulky. You got stuff there. I'm not going to act like it's wholly offensive.
I do want to highlight the Mischievous, actually. Mischievous is
I
actually...
don't. For those who aren't aware, I'm very biased. Miss Magius is my favorite Pokemon, and I'm very upset that Mischievous got taken twice and Miss Magius was not taken at all. Regardless, that's a me thing. That doesn't matter.
I pulled a cool Miss Magius trading card and made him happy.
Very true. But yeah, like, it's pretty solid overall. What do you want to say about it?
I was going to say it is actually very bulky.
Yes.
Of course, with the Eviolite.
Mm-hmm.
And it does have Perish Song. It has a number of great supporting moves. I believe it has Will-O-Wisp. I believe it has... does it? I don't think it gets Icy Wind, but it...
I'm unsure of that. I'd have to check. Let's see here. Mischievous. It does get Icy Wind. That is a tool it has to play with.
So, another speed control option if you wanted to play that.
Mm-hmm.
The Pachirisu is interesting.
Yeah, from what the players said, they were actually very happy to get a Pachirisu. Like, it was one of those most wanted picks, I believe they said. Which I'm not sure how much I agree with it, but hey, if they like the Pokemon and it ends up working out, more power to you.
I don't know if you'll be able to Follow Me Volt Absorb anything, but Follow Me is of course a great option.
Yeah, I'm not going to act like this is 2014 World, but It's definitely a pretty decent Pokemon given, the nature of Draft and the fact that the power level is a lot lower.
And I will say that Pachirisu is surprisingly bulky.
Yes, there's a reason this thing is known for tanking a Draco Meteor.
Yeah, with no special defense investment, actually. I think it was 252 HP 4.
Yeah.
So, that's cool. Next up, we have...
roster overall. Yes, Shanghai Shedinjas is next up.
With Rillaboom, Arcanine, Persian Alola, Lycanroc Midday, Scyther, Electros, Electric, Gallade, Greninja, and Tinkaton.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting having double Eel.
Yes, from the fact that they have an E tier available based on their FA spread, I feel like there's a pretty solid chance we see triple Eel just because they think it's funny. I agree. I think that's hilarious.
It is hilarious.
With that said, though, I think this is just a really good all-arounder. Like, this is the Mario in any sports, any Mario sports game. This is just the all-arounder. This is the regular old Joe. You got some good, solid options. You have things like Rillaboom, Arcanine. You have the Greninja, Gallade. It's just good. I can't see any big weaknesses with this team. But at the same time, nothing stands out as man, that's super cool, or man, that's broken. I think it's just reliable. I think it's solid. There's nothing to complain about here.
Absolutely not. It has, of course, the Greninja that we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Tinkaton is not... It doesn't have the Gigaton Hammer, I believe. But
that is still... Tinkaton, the final evolution. You're thinking of Tinkatuff.
Right. Oh, this is the final?
This is the final, yes.
Oh, never mind. Yeah, I haven't played with any of them in a while.
We can tell.
Persian Alola is pretty cool. Lycanroc
it's got good, reliable speed control with things like, the Persian Alola and things like the Electros or Tinkaton. Lycanroc Midday is good, solid damage, as is Rillaboom. Arcanine's good support. Greninja can do more damage. Gallade can threaten and also has good supporting options with things like Wide Guard and Trick Room. I think it's just a reliable roster. This is one of those rosters that you really just can't go wrong with. It has a tool for basically every situation. It's a jack of all trades.
Is accuracy Steadfast. Steadfast is an interesting ability on the Lycanroc as well.
Steadfast? I mean, yeah, it's definitely not terrible. I think I personally... in all things considered, Steadfast is probably the ability you're running. If they end up fake outing into it, then you get a speed boost. That's not terrible.
Yeah, I was looking at the abilities. I know it has Sand Rush, but I didn't
this
know
team obviously not a Sam team.
I did check that as soon as I saw the Lycanroc.
Right.
Without the sand, I like the abilities of Midnight and Dusk more. Having Midday is interesting without the sand setter, unless you
That's a
set
fair take. One could say that Dusk would have been better just for like Tough Claws, for example.
it, or even Midnight having no guard, I believe.
Maybe. That's a tough call. I think
No.
that
Dusk
overall,
is
though,
definitely the pick you next.
the thing is, Dusk obviously does slightly more damage with its contact moves and just moves in general. It has 2 more attack.
Yeah.
It's very minimal. I'm not going to pretend that it's going to come up every match. I'm not even going to pretend it comes up often. Lycanroc Midday is faster than Lycanroc Dusk by 2 points.
Yep.
So who knows? Maybe they just wanted the fastest form they could get there.
The
Which
difference be-
honestly, fair enough.
the exact difference between Midday and Dusk is -2 speed +2 attack
Yes, it's basically copy paste Dusk, but with a better ability,
and
barring stand.
cooler looks.
I'm not confident on that. I think I prefer the palette of Lycanroc Midday more than the palette of Lycanroc Dusk. The orange is just so blinding.
I'm a Midnight fan if we're talking designs.
That's fair. Also, shiny Lycanroc Midday looks beautiful. That deep navy blue with the white and black accents is nice.
Hmm. Next up, so we don't get caught up on shinies.
Yes. Shanghai Shedinja's good, solid, reliable Jack of all trades roster. Can't really go wrong.
3 eels is funny.
I agree.
Once we get to the later picks, it's like repeating the same things. I like Scyther. Gallade is cool. Greninja's cool. Tinkaton is cool. I
Yeah.
don't know how I feel about Triple Eel. If they do go that route,
I think it is hilarious, and I think more power to the player there.
it is funny.
Yes. Next roster, the Inazuma Iron Hands. This being led by Robbie, a former season winner and a league staff, easily one of the best players in the whole server. I think, like, obviously there are some new people that I may or may not be too familiar with. I'm not going to act like, all of our established members are the best players ever, but Robbie, really solid player.
I think
One of those people
top
that
4,
if you
top
take
5.
pretty commonly, yeah, like I'm not confident he's ever missed playoffs, and even when he is in playoffs, I'm not certain he's ever gotten knocked out round 1. I mean, in the season that I ended up winning, I faced him in the finals, and he put up a really solid fight, all things considered. He did a great job that whole season.
He is running the final Urshifu single strike.
Yep, that's
Magnezone,
the complete package.
Inteleon, Bramblegast, Vivian, Braviary, Cetadel, Ceruledge, Screamtail, and Quillfish.
Mm-hmm.
The Inteleon is
This,
probably the standout for me.
this roster is a bit interesting. I think the biggest problem is just that its speed tiers seem very odd. I think that it's going to have to rely on things like potentially Braviary to set up Tailwind, or honestly, maybe even Inteleon to just spam Icy Wind. I think that overall, its speed tiers are going to be its downfall, if there is a downfall at all. Of course, it is still solid. There are plenty of things you can do. Screamtail is a really good Trick Room setter if you want to go for a more slower route. So I'm not going to act like, going fast is the only option here. But overall, it just seems pretty decent. It's a little bit disconnected. I don't see that much synergy in between each mon. Like for example, Bramblegast feels pretty out of place here. But, it's a grass type. It fills that role. And it's hard to go wrong with an Urshifu. You have Urshifu, you have Screamtail, you have Ceruledge. There's plenty to work with here. It's definitely not my type of roster. I'm not going to act like I fully understand the thought process behind a lot of these picks. But it's very clear that, this was crafted by Robbie. He's well known for being an excellent player. I'm willing to trust his judgment on some of these, even if they may look out there to me.
Absolutely. I am looking forward to seeing how his team pretty much functions. I agree with your speed tiers. I know a couple things can flip the speeds, but I think if he can manage the speed tiers, it's a very dangerous team.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to take some careful play, but hey, he's a good player. I trust he can do it. Next up, we have the second to last team, and I think that this is by far the most interesting team we have seen so far, not because of what's present, but because of what is missing. The Southampton Smugleaves is the only team to not have drafted their S/S plus Pokemon. And now, this may seem a bit weird at first. When you think about it, every single person in your pool can only ever take one. So if you decide to just not take yours and instead focus on A tiers and B tiers and other highly contested Pokemon that people really, really want, and just let them fight over S and S plus Pokemon while you take everything below them, just steal it right from under their noses, that's really scary, and it's a really good strategy, and it's what they've employed here. They have their whole roster, barring their S/S plus, so we don't quite know what their big power play is going to be, but the rest of their roster is pretty dang scary. Smeargle, you want to go ahead and go over it?
Yep. They're starting with their A tier is Iron
B
Thorns.
tier, actually. B tier.
B tier.
Mm-hmm.
Iron Thorns, Slithering Moltres, Hisuian Bravery, Kilowattrel, Gothita, Baxcalibur, Crocodile, Basculegion Female, and Venonat.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, like
And
we mentioned, the Venonat, really good E tier pick, and just solid overall here. You got the Baxcalibur, you got the Slitherwing. There's so much solid offense here that it's hard to find any big holes there.
so, a small spoiler, the pilot of this team is Jamie Boyd, who in the server was very excited to get the Venonat.
Yes, obviously, depending on how experienced you are or aren't with Pokemon, it's entirely possible it's a name you don't know. But to make a long story short, well-known player,
Very
very good
seasoned.
at the game.
And
Yes, brand new to the server, but they've made it clear that they're not brand new to draft.
and they are well known for Eviolite Pokemon.
Also true, yes. What were the two Pokemon? I believe it's Cottony they won with, and then there was one other.
Ooh, I
I don't recall off the top of my head, but yes.
I don't either.
The Venonat is definitely not a pick that's unsurprising given the history of the player. But even just looking past the Venonat, like we said, it's a good E tier, but that's not all the roster is. Excalibur, Iron Thorns, Slitherwing, like those
Togetic.
three alone.
Togetic.
Togetic, that's what it was. Thank you. But yeah, those three that I mentioned alone already really good offensive threats, and they have some good support backing them up. Moltres is really bulky and can provide Will-O-Wisp and Tailwind. You have Kilowattrel, which obviously benefits from its own Tailwind and can set it itself. Gothita is, solid fake out Pokemon with Shadow Tag. Obviously, it's super frail, but hey, Sash or Eviolite can make up for that fact. Crocodile is an Intimidator. Basculegion F, while it lacks the attack stat that the male version has, it still has some good tools, including things like Last Respects and Adaptability. So it's certainly not something to sleep on by any means. That thing can absolutely catch you off guard in an endgame.
Basculegion is like the Latios and Latias, correct?
It's similar in that aspect. The difference between Basculegion male and female is that male has 20 more attack, while female has 20 more special attack. However, it's weighted in the male's favor because the male has 112 attack and the female only has 100 special attack.
Hmm.
So yes, it's generally accepted that Basculegion male is a lot better, but female has its usage, and it's a tier lower than the male version, which definitely can be relevant. Yes, that can be a big deal.
And I believe
one could argue that trading those 20 attack stat points for 20 more special attack and a lower tier is a much better trade than I otherwise would have in any other environment.
And it doesn't look like you're using something like Rain, so Basculegion Female can make use of other tools.
Yeah, things like adaptability for more damage, Mold Breaker for some niche scenarios, things like potentially hitting a Hydreigon, steel, like either a Poison, Steel, or Fire-type, Terra-type Hydreigon with a ground move, thanks to Mold Breaker. Like, things like that, pretty solid. Obviously, adaptability's damage is great. It still has tools like Last Respect. Of course, it has its special move pool. It has things like Hydro Pump. It has Ice Beam. It has, I believe, Shadow Ball. Yeah, like, there's a lot to work with here. It's a good pick, all things considered.
And I do believe Baxcalibur was his first pick.
Yes, that is true as well. The Baxcalibur, like we mentioned, it was the first pick of two different players. Clearly, it being an A tier, I'm not going to say it was a mistake, but it made it a lot more appealing because the previous season it didn't get drafted at all, I believe.
Yeah, so this will definitely be very interesting to see if Baxcalibur was a mistake. But at the same time, at least one of the players is notably skilled. I don't remember who in the other pod drafted the Baxcalibur.
The other person that did was Jay, who is obviously quite skilled. They did win a season previously, and they are a league staff member.
So they're both.
They're both quite good players, so it's clear that they both know what they're talking about.
It is also a very weighted question if the Baxcalibur is broken or the people that drafted
Right?
them
Did they
were
just
that good.
pilot it well? Right. That's definitely something worth discussing.
And last but not least, we
Yes, the
have
very last pick. We have the Giddy Goomies. Mm-hmm.
With
another new player to the league, and they have, as I mentioned, I think that the Southampton Smug Leafs has one of the most interesting rosters because of what they don't have. Giddy Goomies has one of the most interesting rosters because of what they do have. They're running, of all things, Thunderous Sun, with Thunderous, Quaquaval, Flamigo, Rotom Heat, Oricorio Bailey, that's the fire one, Scovillain, Spupa, Mimikyu, Lilligant, and Slacking. So that was 4 different Pokemon that can all greatly benefit from Sun on Thunderous, who obviously is a great Pokemon in its own right, but is also able to, run Prankster Sunny Day, similar to how a different team, that being the Wishing Well Washing Machines, is running Tornadus for Prankster Rain Dance. I think Thunderous Sun is really interesting because it's inherent, electric typing, and Wild Bolt Storm is able to counter a lot of the water types that would normally threaten them, and it just overall is a great support for propping those Pokemon up.
Yep, it is definitely a very it looks like it might need the sun sometimes.
Oh, it's definitely going to be reliant on Sun. I'm not going to deny that point, but I think this is one of the most unique teams we've ever seen, and I personally cannot wait to see how this is piloted, because just I suppose this is going to sound corny, and there's no way to not make it sound corny, but just looking at this roster makes me giddy because it's so interesting and it has so much going on. I cannot wait to see this played.
Absolutely, and the Flamigo with nothing notably set up reliant is very interesting.
This is true. One could argue that maybe they should have gone like Lilligant Hisui so that Flamigo could copy the Victory Star, but at the same time that would give you, a second fighting type, and I mean we already got 3 fire types. We don't need more roll overlap.
Yep, but at the same
But yeah,
time, there are
it's got some
very
interesting stuff.
interesting things. Mimikyu can Swords Dance on a Flamigo switch.
Yeah, Mimikyu can Swords Dance, Quaquaval can Swords Dance. It can also Aqua Step, notably. That is a big thing.
I was going to say, if Quavel
Yeah.
gets boost, Flamigo can come in, copy those boosts.
Yeah, that's also probably another reason why it's regular Lilligant and not Lilligant Hisui. There's already 2 fighting types.
Yep. Even the Oricorio might catch a Dragon Dance, which is that's niche.
Unlikely, but it's very possible.
It's
yes.
niche. But
Also, thank you for bringing up Dancer as an ability, because yes, it can actually copy the Lilligant Quiver Dance, which pretty scary if you ask me.
If you have a weak lead or a passive lead, you could get rolled.
Yeah, this thing can just set up on you. I think that in terms of how much I'm looking forward to watching the matches, I personally might say Giddy Gumi is my most anticipated player, just because their roster is so unique and so interesting.
Yeah. And those were all of the teams. I am very interested to watch the league, and next week coming back to see how week 1 went.
Absolutely.
First of all, seeing how the pods have completed their drafts. But also...
Now, Smeargle.
Yes?
Before we get out of here, I already mentioned, I think Giddy Gumi is my favorite team just because of how unique it is. You already mentioned that what your favorite team in Pool A was. Before we fully sign out, I want to know, Pool B, what do you think is your favorite team? And what do you think is the most threatening team?
So, that's interesting. I might be biased as your friend, but your team looks very interesting, and of course, talking to you, I know what your team can do. I actually... There's things that look interesting, but I don't think I have a favorite.
That's completely fair. There's a lot of unique stuff here. There's a lot of cool things going on. So not having a favorite is completely fair. However, are there any teams Are there any teams that stick out as being especially threatening that you look at and you're just like, whoa, how'd they get away with that draft?
That might just be yours, to be honest.
I'm flattered.
The Nickets is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm naturally curious to see how the Chansey team is going to go.
Right. I think their best case scenario for that team is to, if I'm being entirely honest, not bring Chansey.
Okay,
But hey, we'll see.
seriously,
It could have some stuff. I'm not going to completely discount it just for the joke. It has some stuff it can do.
it is a bulky support Pokemon. If you run Cleric support, it could be good. If you run supportive moves on it, say, I think it has Icy Wind. If you ignore the things that I did with it, it's still a good Cleric Pokemon.
Yeah, it's decent. Obviously, it crumples to any strong physical move, but I mean, it's not like you're going to see every team, have a strong fighting type of close combat in this format. So its big
There's
weakness
only 4
is
of
a
them.
little harder. I think there's more than just the Urshifu.
There's at least 4 of them.
There you go. But yeah, I think that's definitely a good coverage of the teams overall. Thank you for joining me, Smeargle. And by that, I mean thank you for having me because, it's kind of split, but you're also kind of big guy.
So just like that, I'm kicking him off. I will
Take care, everyone. You will hear my incoherent ramblings another day.
And I look forward to seeing what next week looks like. Lime, thank you for joining me.
Smeargle, thank you for having me.
And to everyone in the Draft League, good luck and have fun.